Good afternoon. The first item of business is portfolio questions. The first portfolio this afternoon is Climate Action and Rural Affairs. I remind members that questions 5, 9 and 10 are grouped together, and I'll take any supplementaries on these questions after all three have been answered. If a member wishes to request a supplementary question, they should press the Request to Speak button during the relevant question. Number 1, Joe Fagan.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to develop fairer food production systems.
Minister.
I thank Joe Fagan for that question and welcome him to the Chamber. The Scottish Government is committed to supporting agriculture, food production and our food and drink sectors in a fair manner. In March, we published our first rural support plan, outlining support for the next 5 years, providing clarity, certainty and opportunity to plan. We've committed to continuing direct payments to active farmers and crofters and delivering on key outcomes for Scotland, but also ensuring proportionality for our valuable small producers. We have also committed to a phased transition from legacy CAP to the new tailored domestic support schemes developed in partnership with the sector to avoid cliff edges in support.
Joe Fagan.
Thank you, and could I thank the Minister for that response. Now, the Scottish Government know the benefits of community wealth building, shorter, more resilient supply chains and more of the wealth built locally retained within communities. So would the Government therefore agree that the question of community ownership, which is referenced in the Good Food Nation plan, must be about more than access to land and should be explored further, and that growing the cooperative economy in this sector can help build resilience and economic justice in a changing and uncertain world?
Minister.
I confirm I can absolutely agree with what Joe Fagan has just said. Cooperation is absolutely essential, whether that's about land ownership, whether it's about food production or cooperation in actually getting it into the public sector. And I should point out that we've just announced that there's going to be a public sector task force, and that cooperation, that collaboration is exactly what will make that a success. So I welcome Joe Fagan's question.
Katie Hagman.
I thank the Minister for that response, and I welcome the ambitions of the Good Food Nation Bill. I also welcome the Good Food Nation plans will be expected to have regard to, and I quote, the role of a sustainable food system. Can I ask when the Scottish Government will bring forward the secondary legislation for the Good Food Nation Bill in order to ensure that plans can be developed within relevant authorities? Minister.
I can say that the process of that is ongoing right now as we speak, and it is our desire to make sure that we make good quality local food accessible through the Good Nation plans right across the country.
Tim Eagle.
Well, at the heart of any food production system has farmers, and the fundamental problem we are facing is that with the quite poor rural support plan we've now got, current subsidies like LFAS just aren't quite hitting the mark. More and more farmers in my area, in the Highlands and Islands, are raising the question about what the future of LFAS is. So will the Minister now confirm what is the future for subsidies like LFAS?
Minister.
Well, I think Tim Eagle knows very well that this Government has been absolutely crystal clear that support for our primary producers is absolutely essential. It's one that we are going to continue to do. What the shape of that looks like will be developed over the next number of years. The industry have been asking for certainty. We've got that certainty between now and 2030. That's already guaranteed. We are working on what LFAS looks like, what the voluntary couple of support looks like, and we are making sure that active farmers are the ones who receive the support to make sure that rural communities are protected. And I give that assurance to Tim Eagle as well as the farming community.
Number 2, Clare Haughey.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its programme for Government 2021-22 commitment to consult on the phasing out of farrowing crates.
Minister.
The Scottish Government remains committed to this work, and indeed in September I hosted and chaired a constructive roundtable discussion on alternative farrowing systems here in the Scottish Parliament with representatives from the Scottish pig industry, animal welfare organisations and academia. Excuse me. Work is ongoing, which has included my officials having further discussions with academia to find a definitive direction as to what replaces them while improving sow welfare and supporting the viability of the industry. So we will continue to listen and work with the industry and key stakeholders on how best to achieve the improvements in animal welfare.
Clare Haughey.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Roughly half of the over 25,000 mother pigs in Scotland are housed indoors, almost all of them held in farrow crates. Animal welfare organisations such as Humane World for Animals have been calling for a phasing out of these crates for years, Minister. So will you commit to legislating swiftly on this issue and ensure a transition to free farrowing pens?
Minister.
I should point out to the member that we are doing this in consort with the UK Government. There's a joint consultation ongoing as we speak. I've confirmed with DEFRA ministers our agreement to do that joint consultation, so we will therefore be working closely with the UK Government and other devolved administrations on the delivery of this programme.
Number 3, the member is not in the chamber. Number 4, Gillian Mackay.
To ask the Scottish Government when it will implement management measures for inshore marine protected areas and priority marine features.
Minister.
Bear with me, Presiding Officer. You caught me out there. Presiding Officer, bear with me.
I'll give the Minister a moment.
The answer to the question that is being asked by Gillian Mackay about the marine protected areas is one that has, I have to admit, has come new to my element of the portfolio. It's something that I am working on with our officials and stakeholders right now. I took I took receipt of the petition that was handed out yesterday in front of the Parliament building, and it is something that I'm actively working on as we speak.
Gillian Mackay.
I'm pleased that the Minister's getting up to speed in this part of the portfolio, but Scotland's network of marine protected areas was intended to be a vital marine safeguard, but the designation itself does not protect our marine environment from the impacts of trawling and dredging. So can the Minister set out a clear timeline for the consultation and development of these management measures to give assurance to our coastal communities?
Minister.
As I've said previously, I am currently working on what that consultation looks like. Cabinet Secretary has given a commitment that it will be done as soon as we can possibly do so. But there is a considerable amount of work that needs to be done to make sure that we're asking the right questions, that we are getting robust plans in place at the same time, making sure that rural coastal communities are protected at the same time.
Donald McKinnon.
Thank you for that response. To ask the Scottish Government what lessons it has learnt from the disastrous HPMA consultation in 2022-2023, and to ask what engagement has taken place with coastal communities, including the Western Isles Fishermen's Association, ahead of any further consultation in this area.
Minister.
So I can give an absolute guarantee that there is consultation right across the sector, across all sectors, because we are very cognisant of the fact that this is going to be a very contentious issue. There are going to be people who are going to be very unhappy with the results of this either way. So we're taking our time, we're making sure we're asking the right questions, we're consulting with all the people who are going to be involved. But I'm going to approach this in exactly the same way as I approached every other thing that I've had to do where it is contentious. That's to try to bring people together, work out what the issues are, work out what the problems are, find a balanced position, and then get that implemented through the consultation and through the work that's ongoing just now.
The next questions are grouped. Number 5, Mark Ruskell.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what national assessment it has made of the climate impact associated with hyperscale AI green data centres.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government is not undertaking a wholly national assessment of the remit the member specifically outlined on data centres. However, we are currently engaging with industry and partner agencies to better understand the cumulative impacts of data centre developments on the environment. Currently, where new planning applications come forward, planning authorities have a responsibility to consider the environmental implications of all development proposals, not just in data centres, on their individual merits, but the data centres or other developments indeed. In cases where any proposal is likely to have a significant environmental effect, these powers are further supplemented by the procedures set out in the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Scotland Regulations 2017.
Mark Ruskell.
Well, I hear what the Cabinet Secretary says about the engagement she's had with industry, but it's communities that are facing a deluge of applications for data centres. And as people here today from Fife and across Scotland who are raising their concerns, answers are needed, Cabinet Secretary. Fife Council have now asked the Scottish Government for direction over the environmental assessment of the proposed data centre at Octatool and Fife. And isn't it the case, really, that the Scottish Government has been totally caught out on this issue? Coming up with a definition of a green data centre next year will be far too late for decision makers like Fife Council. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that she needs to sit down with the Planning Minister, sort out the guidance and in the meantime put in place a moratorium on decision making?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I want to first of all say that in my answer I didn't just say industry. I said industry and other partners. And that indeed involves local authorities as well. And indeed, I'm obviously having a lot of correspondence from new MSPs around this issue, a number of questions today as well. I think one of the things about data centres is that data centres also have to be in the right place. They have to be in the right place. There's actually maybe some advantages that you can actually have by siting data centres next to an off-taker, so that you're effectively taking the heat from data centres and being used so that you're displacing fossil fuel heating and maybe an infrastructure project as well. And these are issues that obviously planning officers have to take into account. But I would say that there are indeed, as I said, the Town and Country Plan environmental impact assessment regulations do already have the tools for any development. However, we're actively looking because obviously as a result of some of the incentives that have been put in place by the UK Government for locating data centres in the north of England and in Scotland, we are seeing a lot of speculation at the moment. Some of these plans might not actually go to planning, some of them will, and we are actually working to make sure that we have a real, I suppose, everything in place so that we give their planning officers throughout the country the tools to be able to assess them correctly.
Number 9, Gary Bowes.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of any impact in the environment of the construction and operation of hyperscale data centres.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yeah, well, first of all, I need to probably apologise because I am going to be given similar answers. A lot of questions were exactly the same. The Scottish Government, as I said, is building an understanding of the environmental impacts associated with the construction and operation of hyperscale data centres. And where new planning applications will come forward, planning authorities do have a responsibility already to consider the environmental implications of all proposals on their individual merits. In cases where the proposal is likely to have a significant environmental effect, these powers are supplemented, as I've said, by the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Scotland regulations.
Gary Bowes.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Many of my constituents have been in touch with me to express their legitimate concerns over the impacts of a proposed, and it is a full application for a hyperscale green data centre at Larbert, amongst the several applications that have been brought forward across the country in recent weeks. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise what discussions have taken place with Scotland's Chief Planner to define a green data centre in environmental terms, and outline what guidance is planned to be published on this specific issue prior to the Government's digital infrastructure guidance, which is not expected until 2027?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm sure Gary Bowes will appreciate that I cannot comment on planning applications and particular developments. I don't think he would expect me to, but I recognise in general that hyperscale AI data centres are an evolving sector. There's a sector for which there is a lot of speculation at the moment, and the National Planning Hub has been working with planning authorities, infrastructure providers and industry stakeholders to share that understanding of the emerging impacts and benefits. Now, the National Planning Hub was set up by myself and now Cabinet Secretary Ivan Mackay to help local authorities deal with developments for which they maybe didn't have the singular expertise in-house, and to be able to get that particular expertise as they needed it. Technology and methods around data centres are evolving. There's some risk at the moment that an explicit definition could be counterproductive. it potentially could limit the use of professional planning judgment if focused on methods that are becoming out of date. So there's an evolving piece of work that's been done, as I said, between the National Planning Hub and local authorities. We'll need to consider carefully with stakeholders how a definition could be applied in practice, but we will consider whether there's further clarity we can give in the shorter term to support assessment and decision making.
Gary Bowes.
Thank you for that answer. I've already asked my supplementary.
Apologies, Alan Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it plans to carry out a cumulative impact assessment for a number of planning applications proposed for AI data centres, including the power and water resources required and impact on climate emissions.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Alan Brown will have heard my answers to previous questions on this particular issue around the cumulative assessment. We're taking a whole system approach to understanding the full implications of data centre developments, including, as Alan Brown's mentioned, the consideration of energy and water demands, potential economic benefits and the views of communities and local stakeholders. And through continued engagement with NESO, SEPA, Scottish Water will look at to ensure data centre investment takes place in a resource-considerate manner, mitigating negative impacts and maximising positive impacts wherever possible. And I mentioned some of them in my answer to Mark Ruskell. While the Scottish Government is not currently undertaking a formal national assessment, we are working with partners in assessing that particular impact of AI data centres and looking at whether current planning conditions are appropriate.
Thank you. Rufus AI data centre, which is proposed at Holyrood, my constituency, will use the equivalent power output of the UK's largest wind farm, Whiteley's. There's 24 data centres proposed across Scotland, which is why there's this call for a centralised impact assessment. So can the Cabinet Secretary explain how the assessments that are being undertaken will feed in to individual planning assessments? And is she aware that my local authority, East Ayrshire, is actually seeking clarification what constitutes green data centres, and they're looking for guidance in assessing planning applications which are only application in principle, don't have enough detail from the developers who are actually just looking to get approvals and flog them on for a quick buck?
Cabinet Secretary.
We're absolutely aware that there is a call from local authorities, planning departments for a little bit more clarity. We already committed in the AI strategy to publish guidance on what factors are prevalent in a green data centre, and a range of factors may be used by planning authorities when considering these matters. I don't think that Alan Brown would expect me to comment on a particular development, as that would not be helpful at all. But we are looking at considering matters around if the data centre is powered from renewable energy sources, if it makes use of energy-efficient technologies, if it seeks to minimise water consumption, perhaps by a closed-loop system, and supports the reuse of excess heat for applications such as the ones that I've mentioned, that could be a planning consideration about where data centres are sited next to in order to allow industrial decarbonisation opportunities.
Laura Moody.
Thank you. 6 of the current proposed 24 data centres are in my region, and the amount of detail for each one and the planning stage they're at is hugely varied. The very favourable policy for this, the National Planning Framework, came out in 4 years ago, and it feels like no work has taken place in the interim on nailing down this detail. We've had a series of very muddled answers here, and it's not helping my constituents from the Lammermuirs, some of whom are in the Galloway, to feel that they're on a level playing field with landowners and developers. Will you support the Scottish Greens call for a moratorium so that this detail can be ironed out and we can start afresh with clarity on what a green data centre actually is?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm going to be honest, I'm not going to support a moratorium on this, because we feel that there's already planning regulations in place for any development, whether it's a data centre or others, and there's indeed a lot of work ongoing on the particular conditions around data centres. I think you've pointed, the member has pointed to the fact there's an awful lot of speculation in this area as well. Of course, I can't comment on particular planning applications, but what I can say is how we're working, as I've said, in the answers that I've given, with local authorities to see if there's any additional regulation that's required in this area. That's work that has been going on, that's work that will continue, and obviously the volume of questions I've had, particularly on data centres today, means that we maybe have to expedite this work.
Adam Harley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I thank members for asking this question. There are plans for one of these data centres near Bishopbriggs in my constituency, and a number of local residents have contacted me with concerns about the potential impact it could have. I think it's really important that people who could be affected have the chance to be heard and to understand what the impact of these centres could be. So does the Cabinet Secretary agree that every effort should be made to ensure proper consultation is carried out with local residents?
I would say it's absolutely essential that proper consultation is carried out with residents, regardless of what the development is. But obviously there has been a lot of speculation on data centres in particular since the UK Government announced Scotland's the AI growth zone in Lanarkshire, and indeed that we've got similar pressures in the north of England as the conditions have been made favourable for investment. So we need to be alive to the fact that these data centres have to be sited in the right place and with the explicit consent of the communities that they are nearby to. There is a lot of opportunities, as I've said, for data centres to be sited in places for which they can actually provide additional use of the excess heat to other developments as well, and I would like to see planning officers taking that into account. But obviously, as I've said to many members before, we're looking at the particular environmental impact assessments if they're fit for purpose for data centres, but I would expect, regardless of the development, there must be public consultation.
Stephen Bonner.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her previous and extensive answers on this subject. Can she outline how the Scottish Government will ensure that any future developments deliver local economic benefits, while also ensuring that planning authorities have the capacity and the support required to properly assess these large-scale projects and protect Scotland's climate ambitions?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I mean, I think the answer in general to that is yes. I mean, obviously, data centres themselves, any kind of development around any kind of employment opportunities and additional investment into Scotland is welcome. But they have to make sure that they dovetail into our other national priorities as well. If the impact associated with the environmental impact associated that does not fit in with the guidelines that we've set out, then that's obviously a problem. But also the application themselves, the types of technology that they're using in order to, for example, limit water consumption, in order to maybe partner with other companies that might want to be an off-taker for the excess heat, could provide almost a closed-loop system as well. So I think that we have to look at both the economic opportunities here, but we have to be aware of where things are being developed, that there needs to be an economic opportunity for the area which they serve.
Graham Simpson.
Many thanks, Presiding Officer. So we've got a deluge of speculative applications for AI data centres across the country, and we've heard already that the area that I represent, North Lanarkshire, is designated an AI growth zone. Isn't the truth that we need to have national guidance from the Scottish Government on where these data centres should be, how many the country actually requires, and that work needs to be expedited at pace over the summer?
Cabinet Secretary.
Graham Simpson is right that the UK Government announcing that AI growth zone in Lanarkshire has meant there's an awful lot of speculation at the moment. And indeed, many of the speculative projects will not even go into planning. But he's absolutely right. The work is continuing. I think I've outlined some of the work that's going on with the National Planning Hub in order to inform decisions that get made. But of course, if there's anything additional in terms of regulation that needs to be changed as a result of this emerging technology, then we need to be alive to that as well. And obviously, 3 weeks in post in this area, I will want to make sure that that is done. Obviously, a great amount of interest in this rural portfolios. I will make sure that I am able to expedite the work so that we are not seeing planning officers in a position where they don't have the right information in order to be able to proceed.
Gillian McDougall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last year, the UK Government announced its plans to introduce AI growth zones, which would involve giving data centres a £24 per megawatt hour discount in Scotland starting from April 27. Given the enormous opposition local communities like mine in Auchtertool have to these data centres and the rightful concern they have on demand on local water and power, which has been mentioned, does the Scottish Government have an updated stance on the AI growth zones in Scotland? Thank you.
Well,
Cabinet Secretary.
As Julie McDougall has said, the EI Growth Zone is a UK Government initiative. And indeed, it is the EI Growth Zone initiative that has meant that there's going to be speculation in the areas for which there was a growth zone designated. And in Lanarkshire, that is one. Our stance on the Growth Zone initiative really is that obviously we need to recognise that where there's going to be data centre development, it must be in line with it must have strict environmental impact assessments associated with that, and we must have an idea of the amount of data centres that are likely to go through planning, but also we need to make sure that our regulations are fit for purpose as well. There are opportunities here if they are sited in the right locations, and I've mentioned a few of them in particular. We have an enormous amount of constrained renewable electricity which cannot make its way into the grid at the moment and has been wasted, and indeed there have been payments, constraint payments given to the generators. Data centres can provide an outlet for that to be using that renewable electricity, but they can't come at the expense of other environmental concerns.
A number of other members are indicating they would wish to ask a question on this issue. I'm not going to be able to take them all, but I'll take one further question from Clare Baker. But if she could keep it brief.
Thank you very much. The UK Government has actually updated its planning policy, and there's a clear strategic approach to where they're sited. And I think that's what members are calling for this afternoon to happen in Scotland. And the question is around environmental impact assessments. At the moment, it is not mandatory for local authorities to carry that out. Is that something the Scottish Government would consider changing to make sure environmental impact assessments are part of the process?
Cabinet Secretary.
We are straying into Mr Mackay's domain here. Obviously, I'll take forward some of the questions that you've had around what we do in terms of planning regulations to Mr Mackay. He will see, obviously, the official record of what people have been asking for today, and I will play my part with regard to environmental impact assessments and giving advice to the Planning Cabinet Secretary.
Number 6, Amanda Lindsay.
Is taking to support farmers in mitigating the negative impacts of certain plant and animal species on their businesses?
Cabinet Secretary.
Minister, maybe. Scottish Government recognise the challenges that certain plant and animal species pose to agricultural businesses and are supporting farmers to manage those impacts. Ministers engage directly with land managers through forums such as the Strategic Wildlife Species Land Managers Forum, which promotes collaboration and balanced solutions. Financial and practical support is also available through species management schemes, and further support is available through the agri-environment schemes, or the 8 schemes, which helps farmers to manage land sustainably alongside wildlife.
Amanda Lindsay.
Thank you for that response. Many farmers and crofters are bearing the impacts and dealing with the consequences of species management, both financially and mentally. Will the Scottish Government increase the funding and commit to a multi-year, ring-fenced budget that is fit for purpose, and commit to implementing a more pragmatic licence application scheme for the removal of species where their impact on both business and other conservation species or habitats is clear?
Minister. Well, Amanda Lindsay actually points out the fact that there is a management scheme there. There are licences available. There's also funding through various schemes, whether it's the Sea Eagle Management Scheme or any other of the number of schemes that we've got where there is funding, like the goose management and the goose mitigation schemes that we have. So we've already got practical solutions working with land managers to make sure that any issues that arise, we can help to tackle them. But that doesn't mean an eradication, which is sometimes what people call for. What we're looking for is a balanced approach to make sure that we can farm alongside nature.
Number 7, Clare Adamson.
Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with specialist organisations regarding equipment and systems used to tackle wildfire and vegetation fires in light of the increasing risk affecting rural communities, woodlands, parks, urban green and open spaces across Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. Responding to wildfires and vegetation fires is an operational matter for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, who ensure any specialist resources are utilised in the most appropriate way to safely respond to these incidents. As the experts in this area, as well as the main responder, it is for the service to consider how best to engage with organisations regarding specialist resources and their potential procurement.
Clare Adamson.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. There are systems in place, such as fire fogging systems, business in my constituency, and this technology is welcome. However, we know prevention is better than cure. So what can our areas at risk do to prevent wildfires?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think Clare Adamson, and she's absolutely right, obviously prevention is absolutely key to this. Following on from good work done by Jim Fairley in the last session and with Siobhan Brown, the former Minister for Community Safety, on the wildfire strategy. There is a great deal around prevention, and indeed Scottish Fire and Rescue have a public awareness campaign on wildfire prevention, and that was launched on the 5th of March. Their key message is there is no such thing as a harmless fire, regardless of size of the spark or flame. And indeed, I want to commend our national parks. Cairngorms National Park will have fires and barbecues banned in public places between the 1st of April and the 30th of September. And Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park have bylaws in place around having designated camping management zones, and indeed a great deal of signage. So I think the prevention would be education and making sure that you are following the bylaws of whatever, if you are lighting any fires, and indeed if you are in our countryside and indeed some of our urban areas, you're mindful that even the smallest spark can cause a wildfire in dry conditions.
Number 8, David Green.
To ask the Scottish Government what advice and support it provides to rural communities on wildfire prevention ahead of the heightened risk of such fires during the summer months.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government's Wildfire Strategic Action Plan sets out a partnership approach to preventing, preparing for and responding to wildfires. Local authorities, national park authorities, public bodies proactively promote responsible outdoor behaviour through signage, education, communication, and indeed, as I mentioned before, their use of bylaws. I've mentioned what some of those bylaws are in our national parks. The Scottish Fire and Rescue Service launched a communications campaign on the 5th of March to raise public awareness of wildfire risk and discourage risky outdoor behaviours. And during periods of heightened wildfire risk that we're in at the moment, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service works closely with public authorities, land managers, to ensure that clear and consistent public messaging on wildfire risk is conveyed to local communities in a timely and effective way.
David Green.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. The response from Scottish Fire and Rescue and local land management to severe wildfires experienced in the Highlands last year was exceptional, and I put on record my thanks to them. With wildfires breaking out, as the Cabinet Secretary has referenced, including in Lochimber in my constituency this April, we are seeing the risk already. The recent introduction of fire bylaws in the Cairngorms National Park, which the Cabinet Secretary has referred to, demonstrates that a targeted approach to prevention is possible. Given these recent wildfires, will the Minister urgently commence the powers in the Natural Environment Act to allow local authorities to introduce similar protections where needed?
Cabinet Secretary.
All aspects of the Natural Environment Act are being taken forward by myself and Mr Fairley as a result of that passing of that Act in the last Parliament. I also want to mention, well, first of all, I'd like to put on record my thanks, as David Green has, to the Scottish Fire and Rescue. But of course, we know that they were working in partnership with farmers, landowners, people in the communities as well. People who have expertise in Muirburn, for example, were absolutely key to managing some of those fires as well. And since the launch of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service wildfire strategy, £1.6 million has been invested in operational equipment as well, so they've had increasing resource. Of course, with regard to Muirburn as well, NatureScot have worked through the Muirburn Code Working Group in developing the revised code, and of course some of that was gone through in the Natural Environment Bill.
Apologies to those members that I was unable to call. We now move on to the next portfolio, which is Education, Culture and Gaelic. Again, if a member wishes to request a supplementary question, they should press the Request to Speak button during the relevant question. Question number 1 has been withdrawn. Question number 2, Catherine Sangster, and allow the front benches to take their places. Question number 2, Catherine Sangster.
To ask the Scottish Government what support it plans to provide to primary and special schools to enable the delivery of universal breakfast clubs.
Cabinet Secretary.
This year we will invest £3 million in our Bright Start Breakfast Funds, which will provide 9,000 breakfast club places and support over 20,000 children across Scotland, including in Edinburgh and East Lothian, ensuring a healthy start to the day. Our commitment to provide a universal breakfast offer from August 27 is supported by an investment of £15 million in this financial year to prepare for the transition.
Catherine Sangster.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. The UK Labour Government is rolling out breakfast clubs at pace and ensuring primary schools are offered expert support and advice on how delivery can be done in a stigma-free way for children who need it most. And it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Will the Government commit to engaging with the UK Government on learning from their rollout, ensuring that in Scotland we have access to the best possible practice and expert advice?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'm always interested in how other jurisdictions are pursuing policies, and of course we look over the border as well as to elsewhere on that. It's worth noting that a great deal of work has already been undertaken in Scotland in respect of the rollout of breakfast clubs. Nearly half of all primary schools in Scotland just now already provide one. I mentioned in my initial answer the funding that the Government is putting in place, both on a transitional basis and we have funding identified on an ongoing basis. And of course, work is underway just now with COSLA and local authorities to make sure that every child can benefit from the co-benefits of a breakfast club, but equally recognising certain practical or issues relating to rurality where there will have to be flexibilities.
Don Black.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Every child's day should start with a nutritious meal, and we know that this benefits their learning experience and that wraparound care also aims to accommodate parents' working hours. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline the role of breakfast clubs in supporting Scotland's families and amid this cost of living crisis?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thanks, Presiding Officer, and I thank Don Black for the question. And I mentioned in an earlier response that there are co-benefits to a breakfast club provision being universal across our primary and special schools, because we know that in order to learn well, children must eat well, and whilst that is implied and something which most children can rely on, there are many who can't. So it will provide that nutritional start. It also helps parents and carers with up to an extra hour of care at the beginning of the day to allow them either to take up employment or to expand their hours, and in that way helping families through a cost of living crisis.
Duncan Dunlop.
Apologies, didn't mean to speak on this question.
That's no problem. You had your button pressed, not a problem. Number 3, Daniel Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment is made of the provision of post-school skills pathways.
Cabinet Secretary. Apologies, Minister.
Building on previous work and initiatives, this year the Scottish Government has introduced a new government-led skills planning model developed in close partnership with stakeholders, including industry, to ensure our post-school education and skills system becomes even more responsive to Scotland's strategic skills priorities. This work is ongoing collaboratively, including a roundtable that I held with different organisations and business voices this morning, and I will aim to update Parliament on this work in the autumn.
Daniel Johnson.
I thank the Minister for that answer, especially the point around industry collaboration. He knows that's important to me. But in terms of overall numbers, the picture is stark. In 2025, Scottish Engineering estimated that we need to grow the engineering workforce by 46%. It is, and the number of apprenticeship starts in that space has fallen over the last 10 years. Moreover, for modern apprenticeship starts, last year there were 24,849 starts. That's the lowest number since 2013-14, with the exception of COVID. So given the demand for skills, and whilst more young people are economically inactive, what is the government doing to grow the number of starts rather than seeing them continue to fall?
Minister.
The member knows I like to be constructive in my dialogue in this chamber. However, I must gently point out that one of the key problems that industry have been emphasising to me is the impact of the national insurance increase, as well as other pressures and costs that have affected apprenticeship startups and their ability to recruit more generally. One of the areas that we, of course, are looking at and have stepped up with additional funding for is how our college sector can play an even more pivotal role in delivering the apprenticeships that we need in our country, and we're working collaboratively with the college sector and have increased their budget by 10% this financial year. And we are also undertaking at present a review of the contribution rates, so that despite the external pressures, including the extra costs from reserved changes by the UK Government, we are looking to support employers to take on more apprentices.
Jenny Minto.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And in this atmosphere of collaboration, I too would like to recognise the point that Daniel Johnson and the Minister made about involving industry. I see great examples of that. For example, Renewable Parts in Lochgilphead and also SSEN working with the high school in Oban. The latest statistics on positive destination are demonstrative that this SNP government's investment is reaching where it matters most. What work is underway to ensure that access to work, training or further study is not limited by a young person's background, given the unique challenges facing rural and island communities like my constituency, Argyll and Bute?
Minister.
There are, of course, many initiatives and policies in this space to encourage and support our young people to make sure that they can fulfil their potential, whether it's the free tuition that this government has provided for students. Over 750,000 students have benefited from that policy since it was introduced by the first SNP government. And we are investing more in our college sector, and we want to congratulate the fact that in the year 24-25, 93.5% of school leavers were in a positive follow-up destination 9 months after leaving school. We are not complacent. We realise the challenges that we are all facing in terms of technological change, the pressure in the economy around recruitment, but our young people are doing well, and this government stands to support them as much as we can.
Number 4, Thomas Kerr.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it supports the development of skills and encourages apprenticeships in light of reported concerns that young people are steered towards some degrees courses that offer limited value.
Minister.
We want to support all our young people to choose a pathway that suits their strengths and enables them to fulfil their potential to the greatest extent, developing their skills and critical thinking. Our all-age career support, delivered by Skills Development Scotland and other partners, promotes every pathway to our young people. In terms of apprenticeships at the moment, we are investing £198 million a year in around 25,500 new modern apprenticeships and 5,000 foundation apprenticeships and over 1,500 new graduate apprenticeships. And we, of course, are committed to increasing apprenticeship opportunities to 150,000 over the course of this Parliament, supporting our economy and our society. Universities are autonomous organisations. They choose which degrees they want to offer, and in the member's supplementary question, it would be helpful to understand what the member means by degrees that offer limited value, so that we can understand what point he's trying to make.
Thomas Kerr.
I thank the Minister for that answer, and I'll make sure I get a list over to him. I'm always happy to educate the education front bench on some pointless degrees. Working class communities like mine have been shafted, with more money being spent on pointless degrees rather than useful skills and apprenticeships. And Reform believes that money for apprenticeships should be ring-fenced to ensure that it's not spent on pointless courses and actually assist our young people into learning. So does the Minister accept that apprenticeship levy funding was intended to expand apprenticeship opportunities, not to plug wider budget gaps? And can he guarantee that every pound allocated to apprenticeships is being spent on apprenticeship training rather than elsewhere in the education budget?
Minister.
I think the member needs to spend some more time understanding how we deliver the different opportunities within our system through the Scottish Funding Council and Skills Development Scotland. And those streams are actually coming together, apprenticeships, college funding and university funding, and that will provide a better operational position for making sure that we have parity of esteem between the different choices that people make and making sure that we are creating even more collaboration across the system. The apprenticeship levy is a point that has been raised multiple times with me in my tenure in this role and in this chamber. We are committed to working with industry to provide more apprenticeship support, and I refer to the measures in our manifesto that I met with stakeholders about this morning. There is growing demand for apprenticeships, and this government wants to support our young people to achieve in the way that suits them best. But I don't think it's helpful for any member to come to this chamber and make statements that one avenue is potentially more preferable than another. We're trying to create a situation of parity of esteem where everyone can fulfil their potential in the way that they can best contribute to the economy and society.
Jenny Young.
Completely associate myself with the remarks that the Minister has just made, and my supplementary concentrates on supporting our universities, which I think we can find some common ground on, because yesterday the Principal of the University of Glasgow informed staff that a voluntary severance scheme would be launched, with jobs on the line and university staff understandably worried about what this will mean for the future. The last decade has seen a 39% real terms cut to funding for Scottish students from this government. So does the Minister appreciate how concerning this news right now is for staff and trade unions involved in the University of Glasgow? And more broadly, does he accept that something needs to change to fix the damage that his government has done to Scotland's universities? Minister.
I think, as I mentioned in the members' debate just a few days ago, the question of the future of our universities will be a very pertinent one for all of us who have the privilege to serve in this chamber for the next 5 years. The work that was established on a cross-party basis before the election on the framework for success and sustainability of our universities, which has 3 pillars of exploration and collaboration that are going on right now with a variety of stakeholders to come up with proposals on how we make sure that we make the changes that are required so that our sector continues to be successful and that we think ahead for the decades to come and make sure that we're being agile and changing in the way that's necessary. The pressures on the funding of our universities, again, are not just all sit with our government. There are many reserved aspects that have caused higher costs for our universities, particularly issues of immigration law, which are making it much more difficult for our universities to recruit internationally. National insurance increase, again, was a surprise, very high cost for our universities. So we realise that the support for our universities from devolved government is important, but we don't exist in isolation in this question. And indeed, it's worth remembering that we did increase the budget for universities by 5% in the last budget, and we are liaising closely with them. And just on the situation with Glasgow, like all universities, while they're autonomous, we strongly urge universities to only consider redundancies as a last resort.
And with a short question and a short answer from the Minister, Heather Anderson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to associate myself with the comments from the last 2 speakers. I very much welcome young people entering further and higher education. I don't think their choices should be being talked down or denigrated in any way. I know there was bumper funding for the education portfolio for this year, and I wonder if the Minister could give us some information about how that funding is supporting young people make the right choices so they meet their full potential.
Minister.
I would just emphasise as a whole, I've talked about the increase in the college budget, I've talked about the increase in the university budget already. As a whole, as a government, we're investing £3.5 billion to improve outcomes and ensure our young people can fulfil their potential in further education, higher education or apprenticeships. We, of course, will enter a period soon as a Parliament when we make budgetary decisions. It will be the choice of Parliament how much we invest in the next budget in education. But if we want to make sure we realise our potential as a nation, engage in preventative spending and remain competitive economically and improve our society, then education is, of course, a really excellent investment to make.
Number 5, Sengar Beresford.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what it considers to be the top 3 learning priorities for primary school pupils.
Cabinet Secretary.
I believe that every young person should receive an excellent education that equips them to succeed in life. The Scottish Government's priorities are to ensure that all learners achieve expected levels in literacy and numeracy, and that they engage in learning across the curriculum while developing attributes necessary to be successful learners, confident individuals, responsible citizens and effective contributors. Scotland's curriculum is designed to equip young people with the foundations that they need for success, and it has been endorsed by the OECD as the right approach for Scotland.
Sengar Beresford.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her response, although I must admit I am surprised to hear literacy mentioned, as I recently spoke with a former Deputy Head Teacher who currently serves in a senior role in Dumfries and Galway Council, who told me that spelling is not deemed important in our current education system, due to the rise of spell checker and Google. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, how do you Google a word you can't spell?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I will frame my response on the generality of the question, the important question of literacy for our young people. It plays an absolutely foundational role in lifelong learning and in well-being and in tackling poverty, and that's why, in response to the initial question, I ranked it amongst the top issues. But I would remind the Chamber that the latest data shows that the proportion of pupils who are achieving their expected curriculum for excellence levels of literacy has reached its highest recorded level for the 2nd consecutive year across both primary and secondary schools.
Number 6, Michelle Campbell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I bring attention to members my register of interest as I'm serving as a councillor in Renfrewshire Council. To ask the Scottish Government what consideration it is given to future phases of the Learning Estate Investment Programme to support local authorities in delivering modern and sustainable school buildings.
Cabinet Secretary.
While local authorities have the statutory duty for managing and maintaining the school estate, we are working closely with COSLA and with local authorities and the Scottish Futures Trust to drive further improvements. The Scottish Government are also developing a business case for a successor to our £2 billion Learning Estate Investment Programme, and advice on that will come to Ministers for consideration this year. And of course, this builds on real progress under our latest school estate statistics, showing that 92% of school buildings are now at good or satisfactory condition, which is a record high and a significant improvement from the 62.7% that we inherited in 2007 when we took office.
Michelle Campbell.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. In my constituency of Renfrewshire North and Cardonald, the positive investment of the Learning Estate Programme is essential to supporting local authorities in delivering modern, sustainable school buildings. Does the Scottish Government consider joint campuses to be a viable option for local authorities to maximise this investment?
Cabinet Secretary.
Local authorities will make estate decisions and they will do that in consultation with communities to ensure that solutions for campuses are reflecting local priorities and delivering best outcomes for learners. However, it's worth noting that our Learning Estate Investment Programme already includes examples of integration and inclusion across age groups, denominational and non-denominational schools, learners with additional support needs and community users. And there are a number of examples, including Dunfermline Learning Campus, Faithfully Community Campus, Neilston Primary School Campus, Tain 3-8 Campus and Wallyford Learning Campus.
Number 7, Duncan Dunlop.
To ask the Scottish Government whether the children and young people in kinship care are eligible to receive the care leaver payment.
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Care Leaver Payment Scotland Regulations 2026 state that to be eligible for the care leaver payment, a young person must have been looked after under Section 17(6) of the Children's Scotland Act 1995 on or after their 16th birthday, and then they must have also left care or continuing care on or after the 1st of April 2026. The purpose of the payment is to help care leavers, those who are looked after in accordance with Section 17(6), overcome financial challenges and to provide additional financial security for when they leave care. Section 17(6) includes children who are looked after looked in after kinship care, which means they're looked after by the local authority who place them with the kinship carers. Young people who are subject to an order under Section 11 of the 1995 Act are not looked after for the purposes of Section 17(6) and are therefore not eligible for the payment.
Duncan Dunlop.
I thank the Minister for that clarification and would like to raise a specific example of this, because we've been contacted by a grandmother who has looked after her grandchild as a kinship carer since they were a baby. This summer they turn 18 and are looking forward to taking their first steps towards college and living more independently with their granny's continued support, but also the financial cushion of the progressive care leaver payment that the government brought in. But because their grandparents were advised by the local authority to care for them under a Section 11 order, rather than the 17(6) order, they are not eligible, as you pointed out. But this, for me, is a technicality. Similar discrepancies have been ironed out regarding who can access the care experience bursary. And we know the consequences of not giving care experienced people enough support through later life. Will the Minister meet with myself and the grandmother to understand her situation and remove this discrepancy for her grandchild and all care experienced people who are currently under a Section 11 order?
Minister.
Yes, I am more than happy to meet with the member, but just more broadly, we have to recognise the vital role that kinship carers do play in caring for children and young people. That's why we have published the Scotland's National Vision for Kinship Care earlier this year through the Children Care Experience and Services Planning Scotland Act, and introduce new rights for kinship carers and the children that they care for. We are now working with partners to develop a delivery plan to improve support and outcomes for kinship families across Scotland, so I'd welcome a conversation with the member.
Question number 8, Christopher Leash.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what support it will give to festivals and island communities to ensure they are sustainable.
Cabinet Secretary.
Scottish Government and Creative Scotland have currently committed over £13.5 million towards festivals on the islands. This comprises of 16 awards totalling £12.9 million over 3 years through multi-annual funding, and 7 awards totalling £662,000 this year through the expanded Festivals Fund, all for arts organisations delivering island festivals. Creative Scotland and Screen Scotland also support island festivals through Culture Collective, Screen Scotland Film Festivals, Film Hub Scotland, Open Project Fund and the National Lottery Awards for All, and we are very pleased to do so, noting the value of these events.
Christopher Leash.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the Cabinet Secretary's answer for that and the additional support that's gone to island festivals. However, festivals on our islands, like the Orkney Folk Festival, contribute hugely both to island life and our national cultural offering. And while festivals in our cities and central belts can grow with more venues, accommodation provision and transport links, our island festivals don't have the same opportunity to develop. They face constraints and are victims of their own success in that they cannot increase their income substantially, yet have increasing costs. So will the Cabinet Secretary commit to considering, alongside Creative Scotland and Event Scotland, how we can deliver a pilot island festival fund to provide stability to these vital cultural events in unique circumstances?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I absolutely take on board the points that the member raises with me today. I think my initial answer did set out quite substantial, over £13.5 million already being made available towards festivals on the islands. But I quite understand the point he's making about that having to be facilitated by transport links, among others. So I'm very happy to continue to work with him, but also with my ministerial colleagues in transport, to make sure that what is quite a significant investment can be put to best use with excellent transport links.
Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. Can I associate myself very much with the comments and the request from Christopher Leask. This weekend sees the second Watersound Bluegrass Festival take place in Bury in my Orkney constituency. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary therefore to offer congratulations to the organisers Pete and Gail McAndrew for getting this festival up and running, in which he also acknowledged that sustaining festivals of this type relies heavily on musicians like my good friend Douglas Montgomery, who was recently inducted into the Scottish Traditional Music Hall of Fame for services to the community.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I absolutely would recognise the contribution of the folks that Liam MacArthur has put on the record there, and I want to wish Pete and Gail McAndrew the very best of luck for the festival. I think you said it was this weekend, in which case I really hope the weather holds up. That could add something very special to a Bluegrass Festival. And On the general point about Scottish traditional music, I would remind members of the Government's manifesto commitment to create a new national performing company for traditional music, something which I think we all agree is exciting, and I will be absolutely sure to engage with Liam MacArthur and indeed the expertise of his constituents as we develop that new and exciting proposal.
Number 9, Adam Harley.
To ask the Scottish Government what its priorities are for teacher workforce planning.
Cabinet Secretary.
Priority is to ensure that every pupil has access to high-quality teaching by having the right numbers of teachers in the right places across Scotland. As a result of our continued investment, census data showed that the number of teachers in our school increased for the first time in 3 years in recent years, and our 26-27 budget provides local authorities with an additional £186.5 million to protect teacher numbers. We undertake a detailed national evidence-led teacher workforce planning exercise as we seek to understand and project the requirements for new qualified teachers. We also have bursary schemes for hard-to-fill subjects, and it's also worth noting that we recently delivered a campaign to recruit more teachers into areas where there are shortages, including in STEM subjects. But I would finally say, Presiding Officer, that whilst we're committed to working with COSLA and others on long-term workforce planning, local authorities are ultimately the employer.
Adam Harley.
I thank you for that reply, but right now a huge number of newly qualified teachers can't find permanent full-time contracts. That's forcing many of them into temporary work or even to seek teaching jobs abroad. Alex Cole-Hamilton raised this with the First Minister last week, but unfortunately he just didn't answer the question. Many of my constituents are stuck in this bind and they just want a solution that provides some certainty and allows them to teach. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what steps will she take to get this sorted for the benefit of both teachers and pupils across Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I would probably just answer the question in two parts. Firstly, to say that the Government has worked really hard to create and foster conditions which make teaching the attractive and exciting career proposition that we all know that it can be, and we've done that not least by ensuring that our teachers are the best paid across the UK, but also by ensuring the continuance of the best pupil-teacher ratio across the UK. Good classroom settings in which to teach. The second part of the answer is a new policy that we're adopting, which is the 3-year job guarantee for newly qualified teachers. That is directly in response to having heard concerns, exactly as Mr Harley has put on the record, from newly qualified teachers looking for a degree of permanence, and we'll be developing that policy, and I'll be pleased to update Parliament with more detail in due course.
Number 10, Zen Ghani.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, to declare an interest as an elected member on Glasgow City Council. To ask the Scottish Government what steps were taken to achieve a near-record 93.5% of school leavers heading into positive destinations in 2024-25.
Apologies, there's been a point of order. Gary Bowes.
I apologise, I was actually in the wrong place. I was hoping Zen would finish first. I'll take it up thereafter.
There's no point of order, so we can move on. I believe it's Zen Ghani.
Sorry, Zen. No. Do you want me to ask it again? Shall I ask it again, President? To ask the Scottish Government what steps were taken to achieve a near-record 93.5% of school leavers heading into positive destinations in 24-25.
Minister.
Collectively, I'm sure we all want to congratulate the 24-25 school leavers, 93.5% of whom were in a positive destination 9 months after leaving school. And we also, I'm sure, want to recognise together the dedication of practitioners who supported them to achieve this. These outcomes reflect sustained investment across our education system, including over £1 billion through the Scottish Attainment Challenge and wider support for learning. We have strengthened employer engagement with schools and funded targeted support from professional careers advisors in schools as well. There is more to do, always, but the foundation we have is strong, as the figures show.
Zen Ghani.
I welcome the response by the Minister and the positive work that has been done by schools across Scotland. Could the Minister outline the work done in my constituency of Glasgow, Cathcart and Pollok and the positive impact this has had on local school leavers?
Minister.
We absolutely recognise the important work taking place in constituencies such as Glasgow, Cathcart and Pollok, where our local authorities, schools and partners are working together to support young people into positive destinations. While data is not available at a constituency level, in Glasgow City, 94.9%, even higher than the national figure, of leavers entered an initial positive destination in the academic year of 24-25. So a very strong position across the city of which the member represents obviously a significant part of. And the government has been engaged in this through head teacher roundtables, for example at Castle Milk High School, and engaging with developing the young workforce leads in the area. And if the member would like any support from the government to connect them with Skills Development Scotland, the Scottish Funding Council or other stakeholders that may be of assistance in his constituency, then we stand ready to help and serve.
That concludes portfolio questions. We move on to next business. I believe we've got a point of order.
Deputy Presiding Officer, I'm sure you're aware that employers aren't liable for national insurance contributions for apprentices under the age of 25. Could you advise how one might correct the record if they had misled Parliament with regard to that fact?
As the member is aware, that is not a point of order. However, he has put the matter on the record. We do have another point of order. Is the member this time intending to put a point of order? I call Gary Bowes, and I remind members that if they wish to make a point of order, they press the point of order button. If they do not wish to make a point of order, they should not. And I would ask Mr Johnson in future, if he wishes to make a point of order, to press the button, and Mr Bowes not to. Gary Bowes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. You're quite right. I do apologise. During my question earlier on, I should have noted to members in my declaration of interest that when I was talking about the Larbert data centre, is that I actually live in Larbert, and I don't think I did that earlier, and I think it's probably right that I do. So I do apologise.
That is not a point of order. We can move on to next business, and I allow the front benches to change.
Our next item of business is a debate on motion 446 in the name of Malcolm Offord on Scotland needs reform 5 years to 2031. I invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on Malcolm Offord to speak to and move the motion. Up to 8 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. So we've had 6 weeks of debates on a variety of topics where the SNP, as the largest party in this chamber, have set out their vision for Scotland for the next 5 years. The purpose of this debate today is to state clearly that Reform Scotland does not share this SNP vision of mediocrity. To make clear that Reform Scotland is far more ambitious for Scotland than set out by the SNP in these last 6 weeks. Now, the first debate in this new Parliament was a very half-hearted attempt by the SNP to put independence back on the table, even though the Constitution is a reserved matter to Westminster, and despite the fact there is no appetite for separation in Scotland. Mainly because the SNP still cannot answer basic questions on currency, pensions, borders and defence, and how on earth Scotland would ever join the EU with a structural annual deficit of £30 billion versus a Maastricht maximum requirement of £10 billion. If the SNP were actually serious about independence, they would have spent the last 12 years, since India Rev 14, preparing Scotland for separation. So this debate was purely performative. Reform Scotland is firmly of the view that unless and until the SNP are able to answer the big questions of separation, this should be put firmly on the back burner, and all the focus should be on making Scotland the most prosperous part of the UK. Then we heard a number of statements on the economy, where the SNP got into competition with the Greens about how many public services can be given away for free, as if that is the correct basis to judge any strong economy. Deputy Presiding Officer, Scots are too canny to be fooled by that. Nothing is for free. If it's not paid for by you, it's paid for by somebody else. With 1% of Scots already paying 30% of income tax and 10% paying 50%, it's pretty clear we need more high earners to pay for all these freebies. So why on earth impose wealth taxes which drive away the highest earners? It's bonkers. Meanwhile, Institute Chartered Accounts of Scotland have confirmed that Scottish taxes are too high. The six bands act as a barrier to productivity. The Scottish Fiscal Commission has warned of a £5 billion black hole because welfare spending is out of control. And the new Cabinet Secretary for Public Service Reform states his plans do not envisage any cuts. Reform Scotland rejects this la-la land. Instead, our vision of a prosperous Scotland is one where our citizens are incentivised to work by allowing them to keep more of their own money through lower taxes, where welfare will always be available to those in need, but that we put maximum effort into helping 500,000 Scots back into the workplace to allow them dignity and pride and the means to look after their families, and where we reduce state spending by cutting duplication and waste. After excessive taxation, we know the second reason causing low growth in our economy is that we have the most expensive energy in the developed world. But in yesterday's debate on energy, this place literally was an echo chamber, with all parties regurgitating the same old trips on climate, crisis and emergency, while the IPPC itself has quietly dropped these two emotive words from its lexicon because of the science. Reform Scotland is clear that ideological net zero policies are causing disproportionate harm to the UK, given that we account for less than 1% of global emissions, and that the fastest way to get our energy prices down is to pump our own North Sea gas onshore for domestic use only. Now, there will be a complementary role for renewables, but only if they're commercially viable, instead of relying on 50 years of subsidies, which is the biggest transfer of money from poor people to rich people since Robin Hood. And if we truly want a growing economy to provide prosperity for everyone, which is the only sustainable way to combat rising costs of living, then we need to get back to properly educating our young people. The SNP has presided over the collapse of our once gold standard education from outstanding to average in the last 20 years, but they do not call a debate on that subject. How cowardly. Reform Scotland will make education an urgent priority to ensure our young people can get real jobs in the real economy. Technical jobs, which will not be taken away by AI, where skills and training are provided through tertiary colleges and apprenticeships, and where universities focus on degree courses which lead to high-value employment. And finally, as well as wealthy Scotland, we want a healthy one. A society where our local communities feel valued and prioritised, who will always welcome newcomers, so long as they contribute economically, respect our values, and don't jump the queue for public services. Where a kinder Scotland is not defined by allowing men into women's spaces, and where our children are allowed to grow up as normal girls and boys. These are the topics and policies which Reform Scotland's newly elected 17 MSPs have debated in the first 6 weeks of this new Parliament, without fear or favour, but with knowledge, common sense and passion. Our group has real-life experience, as well as significant technical expertise in all areas of policy, and we will be a strong voice for the silent majority. You know, this chamber should be very chastened by the fact that 2 million Scots chose not to vote on May the 7th. A record low turnout, proving this chamber has lost its relevance with the Scottish people. So when we come back in September, can we please have no more groupthink? Why? Because General Patton once said that when everyone is thinking the same thing, no one is thinking. Reform Scotland is so ambitious for Scotland. The status quo won't cut it. Our 17 MSPs will do the thinking, even if you don't, and that is why Scotland needs reform. I move the motion in my name.
Call on Minister Tom Arthur to speak to and move Amendment 446.2. Up to 9 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I move the amendment in my name. Firstly, I want to welcome colleagues across the chamber to join me in condemning the violence, xenophobia and racism that was experienced right here in the streets of our capital on Friday last week. There is no place for violence in the streets, homes or communities of Scotland, race-based, faith-based or otherwise. My thoughts are with everyone who has been impacted by this appalling act. Not just the victims directly affected, but also the communities who are now anxious and worried that they could be next to experience hatred by virtue of who they are, where they were born or the faith they practice. I want to thank and recognise Police Scotland for all the hard work they do every day and in response to recent events to make the people of Scotland feel safe and supported. Scotland is a place that values hope, tolerance and solidarity. Values shared by people who were both born here and who have privileged us by choosing to make Scotland home. I hope these are values that are shared by those who are fortunate enough to be here in this chamber. Presiding Officer, we must all come together to ensure that our values as a welcoming, tolerant and hopeful Scotland are protected, and this government will lead from the front to tackle all forms of violence, division and prejudice.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful to Tom Arthur for giving way, and I welcome his remarks around the Edinburgh attacks. And does he recognise, as we do in these benches, that as well as expressing solidarity with the Muslim community of Scotland, we owe them a debt of gratitude, that there was no call for activism and action on the streets of Scotland by the Muslim community. There were no mass protests or violence or assault of police officers, and that shows a tremendous amount of restraint from a faith that is absolutely rooted in peace, tolerance and openness.
Minister.
I welcome the remarks from Mr Cole-Hamilton and associate myself entirely with them. Presiding Officer, we want Scotland to be more than just a welcoming country. We want it to be a place where people actively want to live or locate in. And that is why this government is prioritising an economy whose strength is felt by people, businesses and communities across Scotland. Scotland is a great place, and we are collectively making it even greater, delivering more jobs and higher wages and a progressive taxation system that funds high-quality public services which will improve the lives of our people and support our businesses.
Angela Ross.
You talk about being a welcoming nation. I just want to ask, do you also recognise that we must be a functioning nation, and explain how the SNP intends to accommodate a growing population pressure, and when we face such things as a housing shortage, GP appointments that nobody can get and school places that are under pressure? How do we cope with increasing pressure on our resources?
Minister.
The member may wish to dress it up in moderated tones, but let me call it out for the dog whistle politics that is. It is utterly transparent. We see it, we will not tolerate it, and we will call it out. Presiding Officer, fair and progressive taxation creates the foundations for a productive economy. It allows us to invest in our people, like our tuition-free university system or our NHS that is free at the point of need. It helps create the stability our businesses need to invest, to grow and to thrive. It makes Scotland an attractive place to live in, to move to start a family, to start and grow a business. And the approach taken by this government is contributing towards that. The newly released Ernst & Young UK Attractiveness Survey 2026 has found that Scotland remains the UK's top destination for foreign direct investment outside London for the 11th consecutive year. Recent investment successes demonstrate the impact of this approach, including Ryanair's investment at Prestwick and Centre Parks in the Scottish Borders. Scotland is in an enviable position. We have great talent, institutions and opportunities. We do not lack in economic assets or ambition. A strong, well-being economy is foundational to everything that this Parliament seeks to achieve, from eradicating child poverty to tackling the climate crisis to delivering quality public services. Economic growth must be felt by people, places and businesses, felt as we eradicate child poverty through sustainable employment and through support to families, felt as we deliver a just transition to net zero, creating industries of the future and protecting our climate, and felt as we sustain the public services that make Scotland the great place that it is to live. Maintaining Scotland's reputation as a world-class place to live and make a home is key to our current and future success. Presiding Officer, there is no place for xenophobia in Scotland. Those who choose to make Scotland their home and to contribute to our culture, economy and communities should be welcomed, not demonised or frightened. No thanks. We have the welcome challenge of an ageing population and the demographic challenge of imbalances in how our population is spread across the country. Some parts of Scotland are depopulating, whilst others are growing at a breakneck pace. No thank you. The positive impact of migration must be embraced if we are to succeed in our ambitions for this country. The Scottish Government recognises the critical importance of migration to secure our economic future and strengthening our communities right across the country. This Government is creating the conditions where all the people of Scotland can contribute to and benefit from the opportunities before us. The Scots born here in Scotland and the new Scots who have chosen to make this their home are critical to a strong, well-being economy that is felt and communities that thrive. To deliver more jobs, higher wages and stronger communities, we need to seize the opportunities before us. To do that requires fast action now, deploying people and skills immediately to capture those opportunities. This means helping to attract some of the skills, talent and people from outside of Scotland and apply them here to seize the initiative and capture the benefits of our nation. No thank you. If we get this right, we will build a foundation for the future, locking in investment, jobs and industries that will provide opportunities over the long term. But we cannot do that alone. Energy is at the heart of our economy and will remain our largest economic opportunity into the future, delivering more investment, more good jobs and lower costs for households and businesses. Our priority is to secure maximum economic advantage and employment from that spend by capturing supply chains and high-value jobs in Scotland, giving investors confidence that projects can move at pace and will benefit communities. I will give way.
Mr Offord.
When about the much vaunted jobs in Scotland, that all the turbines around our country, there's not a single blade made in Scotland.
Scotland to be able to fully benefit from all of the economic opportunities, and that is what this Government is committed to doing. But this is a devolved Government. It does not have the full range and suite of powers of some of our near neighbours like Denmark or Norway, but we work constructively to attract investment, to create these local supply chains, to benefit our economy. And the biggest threat to that is the anti-net zero policies of reform. Now, let me be clear, Presiding Officer, delivering a just transition is a challenge, but the Scottish Government will not retreat in the face of a challenge, especially when it is accompanied by opportunity, and the scale of that opportunity is massive. Scotland's energy networks alone plan to invest about £40 billion over the next 5 years to strengthen our electricity grid and make full use of our renewable energy. That £40 billion investment in the grid will create real opportunities for the people and businesses of Scotland. They are expected to be between 10,000 and 20,000 jobs created in the short term, and these jobs will put real money into people's pockets. Mr.
Minister,
Clare,
you don't have time, sorry.
Pardon?
You don't have time to take an intervention.
My sincere apologies. Presiding Officer, but this is not the full story. Over and above the build-out of our energy grid, Scotland can secure billions more of investment across onshore and offshore wind, battery storage and hydro schemes, as well as new sectors like heat networks, hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. Over the long-term, forecasts estimate there could be up to almost 80,000 jobs supported by low-carbon energy sectors. We have the potential to harness this investment to make Scotland a leading exporter of renewable energy skills, innovative new technologies and be competitive in the global renewable supply chain. But again, and this is the crucial point, we need the skills, we need the people and we need the talent now if we are to seize this opportunity and build the foundations of our future economy and turn opportunity into jobs, wage growth and vibrant local economies. That is why, Presiding Officer, I am asking the Parliament to work together to create the conditions to deliver growth. And that is why I am asking the Parliament to back the Government's amendment.
Thank you. I call on Daniel Johnson. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I move the amendment in my name? Malcolm Offord opened this debate by saying that he, through their motion, was rejecting SNP's version of mediocrity. What was clear in the rest of his speech, it was because he has his own very special version of mediocrity. And this whole approach to this debate is a bit summed up by the motion. I mean, somebody really should have told them that this isn't going to be the only opposition debate that they'll get, because they tried to put absolutely everything in it. And look, and I'm sorry to poke fun, but they came to this place saying they were going to change things up. But let me say this to them. Being inflammatory isn't challenging consensus. Being controversial isn't the same thing as critique. And being chaotic isn't delivering change. You could forgive them for being inexperienced, but they made this debate about them, so let's talk about them. Because I actually don't think they do themselves any favours whatsoever. There is actually a place to talk about some of the difficult things, maybe to challenge some of the consensus. And let's look at just some of the things that they're talking about. We need to reform our public services. But saying you're going to scrap 132 public bodies just isn't credible. That includes all the health boards, all in one go. It includes things like Highlands and Islands airports. Are we really saying that that should be run directly by the government? In a moment. And it also is things which government absolutely should not be running, such as the court service. It's not credible. Likewise, on energy, we need to talk about what actually a sensible mix looks like. But if you wrap yourself up in climate denialism, you absolutely delegitimise your argument. And yes, on migration, we do need to talk about that. Did my party get it right when we opened up so quickly to accession countries? That should be debated. Was 900,000 net inward migration sustainable? I don't think it was. We have to talk about the consequences. But if you wrap yourselves up in the rhetoric of racism and intolerance, you totally devalue your argument and you make it impossible to tackle the nuance that we have to talk about. I'm happy to give
Angela Ross. Point. Thank you for giving way. Would you not accept that when we talk about Scottish people, we mean people of all colours and faiths who are in Scotland?
Daniel Johnson.
Were the only words in terminology reform we're using, it would be one thing, but it is not. Let's look at some of the words used by reform politicians both in this place and in other places. Calling for cold rage. Describing our justice system as being two-tier. Describing recent migrants as being of fighting age. Those words, I think, constitute incitement, and they are deeply problematic. And let's go through why. First of all, they are alienating. They are absolutely actively and deliberately placing divisions between fellow citizens, fellow residents of this country. They inspire a sense of conspiracy within the system itself, and ultimately what they do, and they are designed to do and deliberately do, and I think members across this chamber know this, instill a sense of threat amongst many people across our country. And when people feel threatened, they resort to violence. This is why I absolutely associate myself with the words of the Minister. Because I think we all need to take responsibility for our words and reflect on the current circumstances and situations. And whether or not there is a direct causal link is one thing, but certainly in the context of recent violence, both in Scotland and elsewhere, it is deeply irresponsible to use rhetoric and language. And what I would say to members across the chamber, because I understand and I recognise there are many different members of the new reform grouping within this Parliament, from many different backgrounds. And I've got to know many of you and I've had conversations. And I understand that some of you come from public service backgrounds and most of you are here to do a job, to make a difference. But I say this to you. Is this the party you want to be? Are these the sorts of politics you want to enable and represent? The ones of Thomas Kerr is laughing. If he thinks violence in this city is funny, I am outraged, deeply outraged. He should think very carefully, because people in this city were injured. There was a clear incitement, and the words that he has used and others in his party at least do not help that situation. I will give way to Malcolm Offord.
Just before that, can have a moment just to remind everyone that you should be talking through the chair, not directing directly to individuals or groups. Thank you.
I say to the member, the only incitement going on is coming from him as he raises his voice in this manner. I said on the record last week, I say it again now, violence is never an answer to any problem. I will say it again, violence is never the answer to any problem, but that is not to ignore the problem, and we need cohesive society, and right now we do not have that, and reform is for cohesion in our communities.
Malcolm Offord does not believe that violence is the answer. Why use the rhetoric of fighting age? Fighting age. What does fighting invoke? It invokes violence directly and explicitly. That is not credible. That intervention is not credible, and Malcolm Offord should think again.
Have a point of order.
I don't have time for another minute.
Mr Johnson, we have a point of order. Apologies. Order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And forgive me, I don't have it right in front of me, but I believe it comes under the decency, and pointing fingers in the chamber, and that is courtesy, is disrespectful. And I think that we talked about this last week, about respectful politics. I can't see much of that actually today. If you'd forgive me, I don't have it in front of me, the number. Thank you.
Thank you for the point of order. I remind all of the chamber about the standing orders about dignity and respect in the chamber, and invite Mr Johnson to conclude his remarks. Thank you.
I'm sorry if my finger offended anyone. This is the 10th anniversary of Joe Cox's death. Only 6 members of Parliament has lost their life while serving in office. Joe Cox in 2016 at the hands of a right-wing extremist. Davis Ames in 2021 at the hands of an Islamic extremist. In the last 10 years, I believe that our politics has become one more filled with hate. And I think we should reflect on this. I think we must confront difficult issues, but we must reject the politics of hate and of violence. It is up to members to choose which path they want to pursue. Thank you.
I call Murdo Fraser to speak to and move Amendment 446.3.
Well, thank you, Presiding Officer. It's been quite a lively debate so far. I think I might take a slightly more sympathetic approach to reform than other colleagues who have spoken, because, to be fair to reform, I think they are on a steep learning curve in relation to how they approach debates in this chamber. I think the kindest thing I can say about the reform motion today is that it is an amateur production. I don't think I've ever seen such a shambolic, convoluted conflation of so many different issues in a motion as the one we've seen today from Malcolm Offord. Because we have a motion today, Presiding Officer, that ranges from the economy and taxation, to skills, to apprenticeships, to education, to net zero, to oil and gas, to low emission zones, to transgender prisoners, to immigration, to housing, and then to welfare. And it seems the only things left out, as far as I can see, are the NHS, and I'll give way in a second, NHS and justice. Virtually every topic within the remit of this Parliament is covered, including some which aren't in the remit of this Parliament. It's almost as if a troop of monkeys with typewriters have been given the job of writing a motion to cover as many policy areas as possible. I'll give way to Angela Ross.
Angela Ross.
Murdo Fraser for giving way. I just wanted to ask, do you not think all of those topics that we're covering are important for our voters out there in the public? Do you not think they're worth a debate in this chamber?
Murdo Fraser.
I appreciate Angela Ross and her colleagues are new to this chamber, but I would make what I hope is a constructive suggestion that it would be more helpful to have a debate on any one of these topics to allow us all time to discuss in detail these issues. We're all going to be here for another 5 years. Don't fire all your bullets at once, Angela Ross. We'll have plenty of opportunities to come back over the next 5 years to discuss these topics in detail, rather than just try and push everything together at the start of the term. And I would just say gently to my colleagues in Reform, they do have some experience on their benches, and they might want to make some use of that. An experienced parliamentarian like Graham Simpson, I know, does know how to write a comprehensible motion, and perhaps they should be turning to him for his talents. But perhaps we should not be surprised, Presiding Officer, that Reform are in this state of confusion, because after all the promises that were made about how Reform are going to come in and shake this place up, they can't even get the basics right. If these are the foxes in the henhouse, Presiding Officer, the chickens will be sleeping pretty safely tonight. And that seems reflected in their most recent electoral performances, because in last week's by-elections, Reform simply failed to deliver on expectations. In Makersfield, to the delight, I suspect, of colleagues, or some of them at least, on the Labour benches, there was an overwhelming victory for Andy Burnham in a seat where Reform had been expected originally to do well. But closer to home, in Arbroath and Broughty Ferry, Reform trailed in third place behind our excellent Conservative candidate Jack Cruikshanks, who managed not just to finish second, but to increase the Conservative percentage vote. And most significantly of all, we had a superb Conservative victory in the Aberdeen South constituency by my good friend Douglas Lumsden, winning just shy of 50% of the vote with a massive swing from the SNP. And in that seat, Reform scored just 2,478 votes, 8.6% of the total. And to put that in perspective, in the equivalent seat of Aberdeen Deeside and North Kincardine just last month, they managed to score 17.7%, so down by more than half in the course of 1 month. Perhaps Mr Simpson's got an explanation for that. I'll give way.
Graham Simpson.
Well, I've personally congratulated Douglas Lumsden for winning that by-election. But the only reason there was a by-election was because I managed to get double jobbing banned. And isn't it ironic that Mr Fraser's party leader, Russell Finlay, opposed that move? Would you like to condemn Mr Finlay right now?
I thank Mr Simpson for that. In fact, I think that just shows what a wasted talent Mr Simpson is on the back bench of Reform, when he should be down the front. Leading the charge. But I think we can reasonably conclude, Presiding Officer, from recent elections that peak Reform has already come and gone, and Scottish politics will be all the better for that. Oh, of course, Mr Kerr, please.
I thank the member for giving way. Just speaking about electoral performances, because he remind this chamber where it is he currently sits and how many members are currently on his backbenches. He might get the leadership at some point, but I don't think that's quite irrelevant at that point.
Mr Kerr, I think it's my leadership ambitions people in your party need to worry about, Mr Kerr. But anyway, let me turn, if I can, Presiding Officer, and talk a little bit about the substance of the motion. Because there's much, actually, in Mr Offer's motion we would agree with. And time doesn't permit me to deal with every single policy issue. Yes, Mr Bannerman.
Mr Bannerman.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Whilst I'm enjoying Mr Fraser's performance as the grandest of grandees in this Parliament and giving us all a lecture on how to proper parliamentary procedure, can he offer an analysis of why, after 10 years as the opposition in this Parliament, his party had been reduced to a rump of 12 seats, and we are now sitting where he used to sit?
I don't think I could ever be as grand as Mr Bannerman, Presiding Officer, but I'm afraid Mr Bannerman is out of date. He's referring to results from a month ago. I'm referring to results from just last week. The tide has turned already, Presiding Officer. It's the Scottish Conservatives who are on the way up, and it's Reform who are on the way down. I'll happily give way again, Presiding Officer.
I think we have to move on and maybe speak to the content of the motions in front of us. Thank you, Mr Fraser.
I'll go on all afternoon if you wish, but Let me talk a little bit about the motion, because there is a significant point here that is made by Malcolm Offord that I agree with, which is the need for strong, sustained economic growth as the starting point for getting everything right in our society. And the first duty of government should be to support that economic growth. And despite what Tom Arthur said earlier, Scotland has been badly let down over the past 19 years. Over the last decade, Scottish economic growth has lagged behind the rest of the UK. Even the UK growth has not been great in that period, but Scottish growth over that period has been, on average, 1/2 of the UK rate. And if only we can match average UK growth rates over that period, we would have billions more to spend on public services. And we need, as part of that economic backdrop, constitutional stability, which is why the SNP talking continually about independence doesn't help the situation. It doesn't help investment. Let's remember, the rest of UK export market for goods and services from Scotland is worth 3 times what the EU single market is worth to Scottish businesses. And yet, the SNP's bright idea is to take Scotland out of the United Kingdom so we can forge closer links with Europe, which clearly will be to the detriment of our business community. And yet we know there are people on the reform benches who are ambivalent about our place in the United Kingdom. Malcolm Offord himself has suggested Scotland could have another referendum within 10 years. And there are others like David Kirkwood, who's openly supported independence and said he would vote for it once more. So it is clear, Presiding Officer, reform cannot be trusted when it comes to Scotland's place in the United Kingdom. And the people across Scotland want a party on the centre-right that has some grown-up policy solutions, that knows how to work.
I'm afraid Mr Fraser must conclude, and move his amendment.
I'll just get to that when I finish this sentence, Presiding Officer. So if people in Scotland across this want a party on the centre-right that has grown-up policy solutions, that knows how to write motions in Parliament, and that actually puts forward a credible platform to reduce taxes and improve economic growth, that party is not Reform, Presiding Officer, it's the Scottish Conservatives. That's the point made in my amendment, which I'm very pleased to move. Thank you.
I now call Willie Rennie, please, to speak to and move Amendment 446.4. Up to 5 minutes, please.
I'll move the amendment in my name to begin with. Daniel Johnston's remarks were very powerful, but also I think he identified sometimes an uncomfortable thing that we need to address, because there are difficult issues that the country faces, and we do ourselves no favours by ignoring those issues. So some of the issues that he's identified around about immigration were right, and we do need to discuss them, and you shouldn't be called a racist just because you raise those issues. And Daniel Johnston was right on the mark with that. But equally, so we've got a responsibility to address the questions, whoever they come from, whichever party they come from, with dignity and respect. But with that comes a responsibility from those who are asking the questions. And we know what they are. We've been in politics for long enough. We know about loaded language. We know about the use of particular words in particular ways, again, that Daniel Johnston highlighted, around about fighting-age men, around about strangers, around about two-tier policing. We know what that means, and we know what it's appealing to. Yes, Mr Charm himself. Yeah.
Mr Kerr, please.
I've been called a lot worse in this chamber. On the point of watching language, Mr Johnston forgot to mention the word stranger, which was quite interesting because in May 2025 it was Keir Starmer who used the phrase island of strangers. So where was his Fox outrage then when he was banging on his desk? Was it only a contingent when it comes to reform?
Sorry, no, I'm not going to let an intervention on that. The intervention was on Mr Rennie, not on Mr Johnson. Willie Rennie, please. I
don't want to speak for Mr Johnson, but I think the Prime Minister did correct, and he did regret using that language. I just wish Mr Kerr would sometimes have a bit more reflection about the language that he uses, because I think it does him no favours. Because we do all make mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes in my life, but what's really important is we do understand when we do get it wrong. And if we are going to have a society that is cohesive, that does pull together, because we can only do this by pulling together, by working together in partnership, rather than pitting one part of the community against the other. We can only achieve the society that we want if we do that. And I think we have got some wonderful people in our country, no matter where they come from, no matter who they are, no matter who they identify as. I think they are wonderful people that we should be cherishing, that we should be supporting. Now, members will have heard me before talk about the deep concern I have that so many people are economically inactive, that growing numbers of young people are unemployed, unable to find a job, the significant growth in issues around about neurodivergence and mental health, the fact that in schools that we have over 40% of young people identified with an additional support need. Now, that's a huge loss of talent, of good people, that we should be looking to try and provide the support that I think that they deserve. But it's not just good for them, it's good for us as well, because our greatest asset in our economy is our people. That's why companies come from all over the world to base themselves here, to access the talent that comes from our colleges and our universities, that from our excellent schools. The fact all of that comes together, that's why those companies come here. Yes, I'll take an intervention from Malcolm Alford.
Mr Rennie, I would agree. I've been on the record many times talking about 750,000 Scots of adult age not working. What is so wrong that in this chamber we recognise that and we prioritise getting our own people back to work into good jobs in our community rather than bringing people in from outside the country? We've got our own base of talent that we're not maximising. Why is it so controversial to say we should get our own people back to work?
Willie Rennie.
See, there's another word, our own people. Who are our own people? Now, I think, actually, my neighbours, in fact, the carers I met at Balnacarran Care Home in St Andrews on Saturday, who had come from Nigeria, they were wonderful people who had done a fantastic job. And I think if they come here and they contribute, I think it's wonderful. So why use the term our own people? Let's ditch the language. So I don't disagree with the fundamental point about... No, not just now. I'm trying to address Mr Offer's point. I don't disagree with the fundamental point that there are too many people who are not economically active, and they are held back for a variety of reasons. So rather than dividing those from others, let's focus on what they need. Let's come up with the good solutions that can actually get them back to work. And he's nodding away. So why don't we ditch the crap? Ditch the language that divides. It doesn't help us at all. So I think the good solutions that we have, and it's about goodness, I think, what we should strive for. I want good, warm homes. I want to make sure we've got good and decent paid jobs. I want to have a good, sustainable energy sources that's affordable for people. I want to have good early I want good early intervention on education and mental health. And I want a good, enlightened society that's internationalist, tolerant, open-minded, good people that look for goodness in society. Now, that might sound all gooey, but I actually think that's what our Parliament should be striving for, the goodness in our society that brings out the best in our people. Now, to deliver some of that, no, I am not going to take an intervention just now. I've taken several
Rennie,
interventions.
you're going to have to come to your conclusion.
Precisely. So I want us, rather than seek division, to seek unity. We're not going to do this by dividing. We're only going to do it by uniting together to make a difference. So let's go for that. Let's achieve some goodness in this world.
With the last of the opening speeches, I call Patrick Harvey for up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To be honest, I was tempted to ignore this debate altogether. I can think of a dozen better things I could do with a few hours than debating one of the most incoherent motions I've seen in 23 years in this Parliament. Goodness knows what shape it was in when the Chamber desk first got their hands on it and tried to sort it out. I saw little point in writing an amendment. I thought so long as there's at least one delete all and replace, it would inevitably be an improvement, and I'll be voting for the government amendment. But there are dangerous and toxic arguments being deployed here, and they need to be challenged. That challenge is important because when other politicians and the media choose to ignore the arguments of far-right populism, or worse still, excuse them under the guise of legitimate concerns, It gradually legitimises them. So we need to take this on and set out clearly, not just here in Parliament, but around the country, why they are wrong. Let's start with the economic arguments. The motion repeats that tired old canard of the highest tax part of the UK, a claim which ignores the higher council tax in England or costs like tuition fees and prescription charges, and it also ignores the progressive nature of income tax, which taxes the highest earners a bit more, earn just a little bit above average, and the difference in your income tax bill would be tiny. Earn a lot more, and you start to pay your fair share. That's how we build, to quote the motion, a successful nation where everyone can feel hope. It's how we pay to protect public services, tackle poverty, and more. But how could we expect a political party run by millionaires and funded by billionaires to understand that or even to care? It will always serve the interests of the super rich. The motion talks about incentivising work, but this mindset says that to motivate the wealthiest to contribute to society, they must be offered ever greater wealth, and to motivate the poor, they must be threatened with ever deeper poverty. The idea of collective solutions for our shared social welfare is anathema to them. That's why their priority is massive tax cuts for the rich, massive welfare cuts for the poor, and even more austerity for public services. On net zero, which yesterday's debate showed most political parties understand to be both a necessity and an opportunity, while they appeal for ever more fossil fuel, even as the mercury rises outside, Reform repeatedly try to say that they actually support the IPCC position. Well, let me tell the Chamber what the IPCC chair said just last month. At current levels of warming, we can already see the effect of extreme events, including intense heat, wildfire, flooding, heavy rainfall and tropical cyclones. These cause disruption and devastation, highlighting the vulnerability of our globally interconnected societies. And as Brian Hoskins, chair of the Grantham Institute, has said, the discourse around net zero is increasingly decoupled from the science and our changing weather. While it's right, he says, to debate costs and implementation, public and political discussion increasingly overlooks the fundamental why. Net zero is not an arbitrary slogan. Rather, it is dictated by the laws of physics. To halt warming, he says, net greenhouse gas emissions must stop. Pretending that we can safely slow the transition ignores the certainty. No, I won't be taking interventions. Ignores the certainty of escalating climate costs, which will fall most heavily on vulnerable lower-income households. Presiding Officer, these are the voices we should be listening to, not Nigel Farage's hand-picked politicians. The anti-environment parts of today's sprawling motion are followed by a brief but deeply ironic call for evidence-based policy, before it then moves on to the other major theme, the culture war agenda. Whether it's the transphobia or the immigrant bashing that we've been hearing for the last few weeks, this is all about encouraging people to blame some of the least powerful in society for the problems we face, problems which are in truth caused by austerity and by the hoarding of wealth by the super rich. In just one line, the motion moves seamlessly from singling out so-called illegal immigration to then calling for measures against what it calls non-citizens. People who are, of course, overwhelmingly here legally. But then we all know that, just as we all know the effect, in my view, the intended effect of this rhetoric. We saw it in the racist riots of 2024. We've seen it this year in Belfast, in Glasgow, and most recently in Edinburgh. It is not accidental. Those who use divisive and racist rhetoric are culpable. To be honest, though, I'll give way once. Thank you.
Lord Melville.
I thank Patrick Harvey for his generosity. Like him, I condemn the violence that we've seen here in Edinburgh and elsewhere. He may be aware that in my own constituency there was fascist and far-right racist disinformation that led to a riot on the streets of Arbroath, with police officers being targeted with violence. I'm sure he condemns that, as I do. But does he agree with me that everyone in this chamber needs to stand up against disinformation of this type as well?
Patrick Harvey.
I do very strongly agree, and I wasn't going to try to list every single place, but I recognise the importance of his own community's experience, and I have urged the government to develop a disinformation strategy. I was going to move on, Presiding Officer, to say, honestly, the main thing that has surprised me about reform since the election is actually how low-key they've been. I think they expected to arrive here full of drama and anti-establishment force to shake things up. But honestly, not a word of their motion would be out of place in a Conservative Party motion at any time in the last 6 years. Not a word of it would be out of place in a Times or Telegraph column. It's as establishment as it gets. And I have to say, being a low-energy populist is a bit like being a vegetarian vampire. It scares nobody, and it's not even going to keep the audience entertained. Presiding Officer, I don't want Reform to succeed as a political party. I think their values are toxic, so I probably shouldn't be in the business of offering advice. But here it is anyway. If they want to play the far-right populist card, they're going to need to do it with a bit of vim and verve, a bit of personality that's been entirely lacking so far. But no, I'm not going to give way. I don't think Reform themselves are the true threat that our politics faces. Despite their economic irresponsibility, despite their anti-environment ideology, despite their instinctive desire to punch down against minorities, frankly, I just don't think they're quite good enough at the job to be a real threat in their own right. The real danger is if government comes to feel that that's the standard against which they're going to be judged. That all they need to do is say climate change is real and racism is bad, and they might come to imagine that they'll look progressive by comparison. That must not happen. The government should not be judged in contrast with the incoherent agenda that Reform have to offer. They must be judged instead against their own promises to accelerate climate action, to eliminate child poverty, and to truly build a more equal and sustainable Scotland.
We now move to the open debate, and I call George Adam. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And Presiding Officer, it's my intention to stay as positive as I possibly can during this debate, because I've seen people who I've worked with cross-party and respected for years get extremely angry at some of the language that's been used in here, and I feel their pain, and it's easy for us to get to that stage. But the people at the other side of the chamber do not seem to see that. They do not seem to understand that their words actually mean something in the real world. But before I turn to the motion today, I want to, which is something Malcolm Offord actually didn't do, Presiding Officer, I want to say something about Scotland today, the Scotland I know. Today, across the United States, thousands of our citizens have once again shown what Scotland is all about and is doing our country proud. The Tartan Army have travelled in their numbers, as they always do, and they've shown the world exactly what Scotland is all about. Scotland is good-humoured, looking for friendship, shows respect to others and their culture, and is a wee bit gallus. With determination to enjoy ourselves while making friends wherever we go, they have been fantastic ambassadors for our country. They remind people that Scotland is a confident nation, a generous nation and a welcoming nation, a nation that is comfortable in its own skin and happy to open its arms to others. In a world where too many seek to divide people, the Tartan Army have once again shown the very best of who we are. And tonight, Presiding Officer, Scotland face five-time world champions Brazil. And now people often say that it's the hope that kills you. The sporting legend Muhammad Ali said it differently. He said, if my mind can conceive it and my heart can believe it, then I can achieve it. That's what hope does. Hope isn't a weakness, Presiding Officer. Hope is a thing that drives people forward. It's what makes Scotland fans believe they can beat Brazil. It's what makes communities believe they can build better futures. And it's what makes nations believe they can achieve more than others tell them is possible. It's hope that makes you want to win. It's hope that makes you want to overcome obstacles in front of you. It's hope that makes communities pull together, families support one another, and nations strive for something better. Most of all, it's hope that makes us want to build a better future and become better people. The spirit of hope, optimism, belief has always been part of Scotland's heart and Scotland's story, which is why this motion feels so out of place in our chamber. Because where Scotland sees hope, Reform sees grievance. Where Scotland sees opportunity, Reform sees division. Where Scotland sees people coming together, Reform sees somebody else to blame. And I have to confess, Presiding Officer, when I first read this motion, I wondered if it had actually been written in various stages in a very long night in a pub. You know the type. It's sounding reasonable enough, a discussion about economic growth, fair enough, we can all agree on that. We want a stronger economy, good for jobs and opportunities for our young people. But then, paragraph by paragraph, pint by pint, it becomes something else entirely. By the end of it, it reads like the ramblings of a very angry man sitting in the zone in the corner of the pub, complaining about immigrants, complaining about net zero, complaining about equality, complaining about young people, complaining about Scotland, and eventually falling out with absolutely everyone else in the pub. It's less an economic strategy or a political vision, it's more last orders, please. And that's the problem with reform. For all the noise, for all the shouting, for all the social media outrage, what is actually being offered here? Division, grievance, a constant search for somebody else to blame. The motion talks about growth, but spends most of its time talking about migrants, gender issue and culture wars. It's as if somebody started writing an economic plan and halfway through decided to go to Twitter and saw what the latest ramblings were on Twitter. Now, reform would have us believe that they're the outsiders. They're anti-establishment rebels, the voice of ordinary people. But let's look at who is bringing this motion. Millionaires lecturing working-class communities about hardship. The architects of Brexit now turning up to explain why the economy isn't working. Couldn't make it up, Presiding Officer. That takes a level of brass neck that some in Westminster would actually blush. Because let's be honest, the biggest act of economic self-harm in modern British history wasn't net zero. It wasn't low-emission zones. It wasn't devolution. It was Brexit. And who's standing front and centre, waving the flags and making the promises? Nigel Farage. The same Nigel Farage who promised prosperity and delivered labour shortages, higher costs, barriers to trade and years of economic uncertainty. Now he's back demanding that Scotland trust him again. And talking of trust, I'll ask Mr Offord, is he going to say anything that the people of Scotland can trust?
Malcolm Offord.
Can I ask the member whether he recognises the inconvenient truth of OECD numbers that said in 10 years that since the UK left Europe, the growth in the UK was 13%. Now that's not very good because the USA was 26%. But France was 12%, Italy 10%, Germany 6.4%. This is a fiction.
So his lordship's argument is it's slightly better than somebody else next door. Complete and utter nonsense. Presiding Officer, if somebody sold you, and I'm someone that used to be in the motor industry, if someone sold you a second-hand car that immediately burst into flames, you wouldn't turn up asking for a second one, would you? You wouldn't trust them. Yet that's exactly what reform expects Scotland to do. Exactly that. The reality is that Scotland's future has never been built on division. It's been built on community. It's been built on solidarity. And yes, it's been built by people who came here from elsewhere and made Scotland their home. The amendment rightly recognises the enormous contribution migrants make to our economy, our public services and our communities. In Paisley, as in every part of Scotland, we know this. Our NHS knows this. Our care sector knows it. Our businesses know it. The only people who seem confused about all of this are Reform UK. And while Reform talks Scotland down, I prefer to look at what Scotland has achieved. Free prescriptions, the Scottish Child Payment, investment in childcare, action on child poverty, a health service protected from the privatisation agenda that they all want. Exactly. Things aren't perfect, Presiding Officer. Of course they're not. No government would ever claim that things were perfect. But the answer to every challenge is not to point the finger at the nearest migrant, the nearest environmental policy or the nearest minority group. That's not leadership, that's political laziness. What Scotland needs is confidence. Confidence in ourselves, confidence to build our communities, confidence in our ability to build a fair economy that works for everyone. And confidence that our future is not bound in the bitterness and division offered by Reform UK. Because when I look at Reform UK, I don't see vision for Scotland's future. I see a party permanently angry at the modern world, a party that mistakes outrage for policy, a party that mistakes volume for wisdom, and a party that seems determined to fight yesterday's arguments while Scotland is building for tomorrow. And I will continue to believe, Presiding Officer, that Scotland's future lies not in fear, division and blame, but in fairness, opportunity, love and hope. That, presiding officer, is the Scotland I know, and it's certainly the Scotland that will long outlast Reform UK.
Jenny Young.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. No one in this chamber could argue that Scotland is where it needs to be. We have thousands of Scots waiting for NHS treatment, schools falling down international league tables. Over 1 million people across the UK aged 16 to 25 are not in employment, education or training, as Willie Rennie rightly pointed out. Millions more face the prospect of never owning their own home, while over 10,000 children in Scotland do not have a home to call their own. We have the existential threat of climate crisis as the mercury rises and yet more heat records are broken this very week. War, genocide, threats to our own national security. It is little wonder that people across our country feel let down, left out and worried about the future. Working hard, paying tax, feeling like the system is rigged against them. And it is, but not for the reasons that Reform UK want us to believe. 14 years of Tory austerity, 19 years of SNP waste and incompetence, a political class consumed by navel-gazing and culture wars that feels increasingly detached from the people it is supposed to serve. But populists of all political stripes serve only themselves and their political ends when they shift blame. They deceive people when they say there are easy answers to the difficult problems that our country faces. A new constitutional settlement, freeing ourselves from the shackles of Brussels or Westminster, blaming the other, be it an immigrant, a refugee, someone on benefits. Reform's motion does, as others have said, identify some of the problems in our society, a flatlining economy, crisis in our public services, a lack of good, skilled jobs. But they are not interested in identifying who is really to blame or offering any genuine solutions. There is underlying inequality in our society. For too many people, the die is cast from their earliest days. Structural problems, not least the state of our education system and the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a precious few, leave people trapped in cycles and generations of poverty. That is why I am a member of the Labour Party, and that's why I'm here to represent the interests of the people of my region in this place. But rather than hunt for the difficult, honest answers to the problems that our society faces, it is much easier for populists to point the finger at the outsider and the marginalised. Last week, I led a members' debate in this place marking the 10th anniversary of the death of Joe Cox. Joe Cox was murdered by a white supremacist with links to a US-based neo-Nazi group. And as the forces of populism and the far right seek to take hold of our country, they must recognise that there are those who will respond to their incendiary rhetoric, for that is what it is, with violence. The events in Leith last weekend that others have condemned, and rightly so, I associate myself with those remarks wholly, are a potent reminder of that fact. For a politician or a tech billionaire, they may just be words. But to the radicalised, to the marginalised, to the isolated, they are a call to action. Jo Cox was a highly political person. She had strongly held convictions. She was someone who knew right from wrong and was not afraid to stand up and be counted. She has been very much in my thoughts of late. I genuinely want to find... No, I won't take an intervention. I genuinely want to find common ground in this place, to recognise the humanity of those across the chamber from us, to work together for the good of the country. But there are lines that I will not cross. And I appeal to those who seek to divide us. Recognise what it is you are unleashing on our country and the devastating consequences that your words and actions could have.
Angela Ross, to be followed by Michelle Campbell. Angela Ross.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Well, I do want to start by saying I had no intention of coming into politics, but I have spent a long time watching people here who are apparently our politicians behaving somewhat similar to today, and I'm disappointed. I've come in here because I am fed up. I've come in here to make a difference, to try to represent people out there who are completely fed up with how things are running here. And that is why half of them didn't even bother voting. There are 17 of us in here now because you are failing. Presiding Officer, I do want to turn to something a little bit more constructive and look at education, because that's a particular area that I'd like to consider. And I do welcome the ability to speak on many different topics here, because I think there's so many things that are broken that we need to do this. Once it was the gold standard of the world, but in the last 20 years it has slipped from outstanding to merely average. And with that decline has come the greatest period of uncertainty for Scotland's young people, and they deserve better. For too long, this government has presided over an education system that has drifted from its core purpose. It has narrowed opportunity, elevated one academic pathway above all others, and left Scotland's real economy crying out for the knowledge, skills, trades and technical expertise our future depends on. So let me be clear. Scotland today stands at a crossroads. The path we choose now will determine whether this nation rises to meet the future or resigns itself to decline. And that is many of the reasons that have brought members from this party into the chambers. We must confront the most fundamental failure of all. 1 in 4 children in Scotland leaves primary school without the appropriate level of literacy. Now, let's take a moment. Presiding Officer, that is not... I'll give way. Yep.
Yi-pei, Turvey.
You are saying that we are in this crossroad and we are going on to decline. But don't you think that Brexit happened 10 years ago through the forefather of your party? Is that the decline we have been hanging on all of us since the last decade?
Angela Ross.
Thank you for your intervention. However, I do strongly disagree. I think we've had 20 years of a government that has not delivered for the people of Scotland. 1 in 4 children, as I've said, are suffering because they don't have the appropriate levels of literacy. That's unforgivable. As the Times Educational Supplement has warned, children who struggle to read at this stage of their development face a higher risk of lifelong difficulties, poorer health, unemployment and involvement with the criminal justice system. With disadvantaged children hit the hardest. This is unacceptable. I'm going to continue because I don't have enough energy. Illiteracy is the foundation and what... Thank you. Literacy... Deputy Presiding Officer, may I continue?
The member does not have to take an intervention, but if the member takes an intervention, she gets additional time. But there's no need to take interventions.
I will continue. Literacy is the foundation upon which opportunity is built in life, and we need a knowledge-based curriculum. We've lost the excellent curriculum we once had. We need to assess learning. And we need, for literacy purposes, we need phonics first approach that doesn't mix with queuing or whole language methods. Now, someone said we don't offer solutions. That's a solution that's used successfully in England, Australia and Canada, and they have higher attainment levels. Reform's ambition is to reinvigorate our education system so that every young Scot has early, clear and credible pathways into productive work and productive lives. This will benefit society, communities and our economy. Learning is not something that happens once at a single stage in life. It's a lifelong journey of acquiring skills and knowledge. We must broaden the subjects on offer. Alongside STEM subjects, we must restore the arts because creativity and critical thinking are not optional extras. They help young people analyse information, question assumptions, solve problems and make sound decisions in every area of life. They teach them how to think and not what to think. And after our debate today, I'm glad we are looking at doing this as part of our movement forward, because we need people who can scrutinise what is going on in the world around them. And that is not only essential for innovation, but for confidence, resilience and responsible citizenship.
The member should start to wind up.
Thank you. In post-school education, we need to be looking at apprenticeships more closely and ensuring that we have additional options of partnering with industries. Engineering UK forecasts a shortfall of 20,000 engineers by 2030 unless apprenticeship numbers rise sharply. So we would be looking at ensuring that this is a resource that's able to help young people build skills, confidence and careers. Scotland can rise again.
The member must be drawing her remarks to a close.
But only if we build an education and skills system worthy of our history and essential to our future. Scotland needs reform.
Michelle Campbell, to be followed by Duncan Massey. Michelle Campbell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to bring attention to my register of interest as a nurse in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde and an elected member in Renfrewshire. First of all, I would like to just resonate quite strongly with one point in particular. There's been a number of members that have agreed with some of the points that have been made, in particular on this side of the chamber, which would be no surprise to anyone. But in particular, Willie Rennie had made the point about having made that visit into the care sector. And I think it's important that we recognise that this is not just a fundamental issue for now. Back in the 60s, it was bus drivers. My papa came to the country. He was a bus driver because that's where we had the deficits at that time. Nobody wanted to do the job. We needed people to do the job. And we had people who were willing to do the work. A simple concept that I think that needs to be digested right now. And at this time, our care industry, it's also important that we recognise that it's about having caring competencies. Not anyone can do care work, and we shouldn't be so disregarding of people who are doing such essential work. So if we have people, highly skilled individuals, that we can put that trust of our vulnerable individuals into, then we should be investing our time into that. And we need to recognise the impact Brexit has had. It's been devastating because we had so many people across Europe that would actually do that job. So I think that you can't sort of recognise some parts, not recognise others. Reform demonstrates nothing but contempt, disregard and ignorance towards this Parliament, and their own lack of understanding of good governance and parliamentary due processes sells the public an illusion that they care for life, for people finding it tough around their communities, when in fact all they care about is their multi-millionaire funders and tax cuts for the highest earners, none of which best serves the people of Scotland. Reform would have our NHS decimated and in the hands of the highest bidders of the private sector without any hesitation. Rather than pontificating an inflammatory use of words, which has been pointed out by several members today, Reform should consider what they stand for. They are meek on policy. Looking at their own policies, they seem to think they have it all wrapped in a bow in 5 policy areas in a couple of paragraphs. Now, I may not agree with some of the policies and directions of other parties, but at least they have them. That is what shapes debate, progresses the direction of decision-making and the public duty that we have all been elected here to serve. The SNP has been in government for 19 years in Scotland. The electorate chose to return the SNP as the biggest party in this Parliament. This was acknowledged and recognised in the action of the SNP being returned back to government without objection within our democratic processes only a few weeks ago with mutual respect and cross-party agreement in this chamber. The political landscape has been volatile. The impacts of living through and recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic has been significant. We must recognise this was a cost in lives, well-being and cost on our society and economy that we could not have predicted the extent of that impact. As much as we all want to move on, that isn't how recovery works. It takes time, it requires focus, strong leadership, something that we have under our First Minister, John Swinney. The impact of global conflicts doesn't just impact safety and security, it impacts our economy. But sadly, the greatest cost of conflict is to the lives of those closest to the wars. Death in some dire circumstances being seen as a peace due to the inhumane torture inflicted. Gender-based violence being wielded as a weapon. Regardless of how much we have learned from past conflicts, the motivation of man and those with the deepest pockets and selfish endeavours cost us all the highest price of human lives. Scotland will never sit quietly on the sidelines of injustice. Our international relationships and investments are for the betterment of our society and Scotland on an international platform. Our power, strength and growth is empowered by humanity, not just by traditional economic drivers.
In the last few days, we have been reminded that 10 years ago, Scotland was dragged out of the EU against our will. 62% of our population who voted wanted to remain. Our vote being ignored, our requests for mitigations being continually undermined and dismissed. In terms of GDP, there was a cut of 2.5% to public revenue of £2.3 billion. This is not an action of a union of equals. This is also a restriction on our growth as a nation. Despite this, the SNP government is promoting and often outperforming all areas out with London, ensuring Scotland is the choice destination for international investment. Progressive taxation is the fairest approach to support the growth and investment for the future of public services. This allows for our national performance framework to have focus in sustainable development and in the reforms required to achieve this. Delivering on an agenda of wellbeing economy is a shift change in our values as a society and fiscally also promotes growth through resilience and stability. Economic growth in terms of macroeconomic levers such as interest rates, trade and immigration are all reserved matters. It is a falsehood for reform to paint a picture of SNP bad. It is the SNP that are mitigating and best protecting our nation despite the constrictions of current government arrangements and governance. Ultimately, Westminster system is holding Scotland back. The full fiscal levers of Scottish independence are required for long-term planning and actions which would allow for Scotland to flourish. If Reform truly want to support growth, they would support Scottish independence. Thank you.
Duncan Massey, to be followed by Jackie Dunbar. Duncan Massey, who has up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, look, an interesting debate, shall we put it. But reform, we've set out the issues and we're here to talk about the issues. And I've often wondered why this Parliament, and in particular the Scottish Government, had such poor energy policies. Why it failed to grasp energy reality, why it won't acknowledge that we have the highest energy costs in the world and that this is driving deindustrialisation and closing down some of our most important industrial sites like Grangemouth Refinery and Mossmorton. Why we have a fragile grid and that if Torness or Peterhead power plants closed, that we will have significant risks of blackouts. Why the Scottish Government has a presumption against new oil and gas, and why they refuse to fully back new ready-to-go projects like Jackdaw and Rosebank, and why they don't back new drilling and licences. And we somewhat saw the answer yesterday. An ideological and rigid adherence to the net zero agenda. A prioritising of the net zero above growth, above jobs, above cost of living, and indeed above the well-being of all of the people. Ignoring any trade-offs, a Pravda-like approach to telling everyone it is working, and a fingers-in-the-ear approach to ignoring the realities of higher bills, deindustrialisation, and actually an utter failure to even reduce our globally insignificant emissions since 2020. Yes, I will take the intervention.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm grateful for Duncan Massey for giving way, and I just make this one simple observation to him. When he's talking about the realities of net zero agenda and why we have it, does he recognise that France yesterday recorded their highest temperature on record, and does he recognise that that is a material consequence of the climate emergency?
Duncan Massey.
I'm not aware of the records, whether they're the highest in... the one in Britain yesterday, for example, was the highest since 1976. At one point, I was really worried it was going to be 1966, and that might be a really bad omen. But, you know, I do acknowledge climate change, and I acknowledged it very clearly yesterday. And France is one of the best examples of an energy system that actually works in Europe because it's mainly nuclear. And they took that decision a long time ago with a serious energy policy. So, you know, let's be clear, our policies are not working and they're not proportionate. And that needs to change. We need a far more pragmatic energy policy. First, we need to revitalise our oil and gas industry. We need our oil and gas industry for price stability and for security of supply. And we know we're going to need oil and gas for decades. And increasing our North Sea oil and gas is going to reduce imports and indeed actually reduce emissions, because those imports have higher associated emissions. And we can do this. The North Sea has a strong and vital future. And if we choose it, we need to urgently remove the Energy Profits Levy, unambiguous support for Jackdaw, Rosebank and all new projects, unambiguous support for new licences and drilling, and we need to restore maximum economic recovery as our guiding principle. And I know that much of oil and gas is not with the competence of the Scottish Government, literally, but this place is actually quite good at challenging the UK Government when it suits them. You know, calling for an end to the EPL. Well, why not call for changes to the law around planning regulation for oil and gas? It's really not that hard. And what damages confidence in industries is a devolved administration that sits on the sidelines, sniping and jeering from the sidelines, when what we need is a Scottish Government that is an unambiguous champion and supporter of our North Sea and oil and gas industry. And what we have is the exact opposite. And we can see that in the petrochemical space as well, where they don't care about Grangemouth or Mossmoran. Certainly don't care enough to change their policies. I will take an intervention.
It was not the SNP that closed Grangemouth. Had we been independent, we could have protected a strategic resource that would have been producing jet fuel at a time when that is in short supply. Had we been independent, Scotland could have been protected by the Scottish Government. As it stands, that is a Westminster decision and nothing to do with us.
I'll call Duncan Massey, but the member's already in additional time, so he shouldn't take any more interventions. Duncan Massey.
I think that's fantasy. I mean, the intervention that SNP made was to try and turn Grangemouth into a beetroot refinery. I mean, they're out of their minds. So for me, it is simple. If we want real economic growth, if we want industry, if we want jobs, if we want cheaper energy bills, and we need a pragmatic energy policy, one that focuses on cheap, abundant, reliable energy. And that means we have to acknowledge a failing system with the highest industrial energy costs in the world, and that means we need to maximise our oil and gas resources in the short and medium term. We need to increase our nuclear power, just like the successful France that was mentioned, and we have renewables as a complementary role. And this is how we secure cheap energy for everyone, ensuring that we protect and add to our industrial base, reduce bills for everyone, and ensure that we keep the lights on for Scotland's future, and indeed, over the long term, we actually reduce our carbon emissions. Thank you.
Jackie Dunbar, to be followed by Amanda Lindsay. Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To start with, please excuse me if I do not respond to every point in this motion, because it's a 400-word rambling mess and I've only 7 minutes to speak. But because it especially irked me, I'll start with low emission zones. It's not a net zero policy, it's a public health policy. The simple idea is that the folk who live in our city centres and the children who go to the city centre schools deserve to have clean air in their lungs to breathe. Who'd have thought, eh? And I appreciate that if it may... Can I even get started? Because you've got 6 minutes, Mr Massey. So I would kind of like to use up my 7 minutes over your huge ramble. Anyway, I appreciate that it may inconvenience the Baron Offord of Garville, depending on which of his 5 cars he's driving at the time, but it is a policy that will add years to the life expectancies of thousands of Scots. 2 years on average, I believe, is the difference air pollution can make to life expectancy. And I will respond to the debate title, Proclaiming Scotland Needs Reform. Scotland does not need Reform UK Limited, does not want them, their policies are not welcome, and their rhetoric about strangers is just simply dangerous. And I know that some Reform UK MSPs get upset when they get quoted. So instead, I'll use a quote from one of their MPs, reflecting on what voters in Makerfield thought of reform. And I quote, "We are either too racist or not racist enough." So I will take an intervention at this point from any Reform MSP who wants to tell me whether they think they're too racist or are they not racist enough.
Oh, nothing.
No.
Nothing.
Or perhaps some different quotes. I told you time and time again, I'm protecting the country. Enough is enough. I've had enough. And there were some of the words screamed by a topless Lewis Hawkes as he was arrested in Edinburgh just last week. I'm not going to repeat the rest of what he said, as it makes me feel physically sick to my stomach. But he also made a reference to our daughters. He's since been charged with 5 counts of attempted murder linked to terrorism. Presiding Officer, I cannot help but think how familiar some of his words were and how I seem to have heard them before. I wonder if the MSPs that have been joining street patrols or the ones calling people strangers might see some similarities too. I'm not expecting them to stand up and hold their hands up, but those capable of quiet reflection may wish to try it. Presiding Officer, I seem to be the sort of person that Reform UK say they care about. I'm a woman and they seem to think I need protected. I had a working class upbringing, living on the farms that my dad worked on. I didn't go to university. I earned my living by working in petrol stations and supermarkets. My partner and our daughter have both worked in the oil industry, and my dad and granda served proudly with the Gordon Highlanders. And I do not believe for one second that Reform UK cares about folk like me. They care about division and power and crypto donations from dodgy billionaires. They don't represent me, they disgust me. Presiding Officer, I'm under no illusion that folk are frustrated at so much of what is happening and not happening in the world today. Across the last 2 decades, we have lurched from the financial crash to austerity, to having a Brexit vote thrust upon us, to a pandemic, to a European war and a cost of living crisis. In Aberdeen, you can also throw in the added challenges with oil and gas jobs. And throughout that time, we've seen inequality grow. We've seen the world's richest folk become even richer. We now have our first trillionaire. And while we've seen the economy grow across the Western world, we've seen living standards decrease. Some folk who have never struggled before are now struggling. Some folk who have struggled their whole lives now doubt if things will ever get better for them. They're seeing the consequences of austerity. They're seeing the consequences of a lack of investment in jobs. They're seeing the consequences of a lack of spending in their local communities. They're feeling the consequences of social security being stripped back, and they're angry, and rightfully so. They're being failed by a Westminster system that is not working in their best interests. Today, we have the billionaire beneficiaries of that system and their pet politicians in Reform UK trying to tell us that the real reason for the state of society is immigrants and trans people, and even wind turbines. If we got rid of all the migrants, we wouldn't be any better off. And who would they blame next? Who would they target next? The same folk who are leading the fight against benefit scroungers a decade ago, when they were in the Conservative Party, are now in Reform UK saying that we should look after our own. Maybe I'm just not seeing what Reform MSPs are believing. For example, Baron Offord of Garville maybe knows more about small boats than me, but I mean he spent the last election campaign boasting that he owned a fleet of them. Let me finish with talking about where I do see the effects of migration in Aberdeen. When there used to be empty shops and empty buildings, there's now Polish food shops, Romanian stores, Indian takeaways, African food shops, Chinese restaurants, Malaysian supermarkets, Buddhist temples, and 2 doors down from my own constituency office, there's now a Filipino supermarket. Churches are staying open due to new members. Charity shops have new volunteers. For centuries, Scotland has been a nation of immigrants, travelling all over the world, and proud of it. I'm delighted over the last few decades the world is now coming to Aberdeen, and quite frankly, we're all the better for it. I am not going to take the intervention from a jack-in-the-box who can stand up and speak later on.
The member can't take interventions because she's coming to the end of her speech.
but I don't get much time as many others. So I'm delighted that over the last decades the world is now coming to Aberdeen, and quite frankly, we're all the better for it. Scotland doesn't need reform, Presiding Officer. Scotland needs independence.
Amanda Lindsay, to be followed by Alex Kerr. Amanda Lindsay, who has up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We have heard much in this chamber about the harm gender ideology is doing to women and children. But the damage runs deeper. It is dividing our society in ways we have not seen for generations. From nursery through to secondary school, children are being indoctrinated, often using materials from activist organisations such as LGBT Youth Scotland, funded or endorsed by this government. In classrooms across Scotland, resources like the RSHP curriculum introduce contested gender ideology to young pupils, while genuine safeguarding concerns raised by parents and teachers are too often dismissed as bigotry. This is not compassion, it is harming the very children it claims to help, including those experiencing gender distress. Yet this is only part of a much larger problem, the ideology of DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion. Yes, I'll give
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm grateful to Amanda Lindsay for giving way. Does she recognise that the biggest threat to women and children in our society is not trans people, but is instead predatory men?
Amanda Lindsay.
Thank you for that question. I fear you're more interested in defending ideology than addressing the real-world consequences for our young people of this. What began with noble intentions to foster greater understanding and respect has morphed into a rigid creed that celebrates every diversity except diversity of thought. Equity now means engineering equal outcomes, and inclusion too often means excluding anyone who questions the orthodoxy. Our institutions have been captured. In universities such as Edinburgh and Glasgow, staff are pressured to submit diversity statements and decolonise curricula. Employees across the Scottish public sector are sent on anti-racism training that promotes discrimination against white people, while students are told they suffer from white privilege. Dissenters face silencing or cancellation. The result is groupthink, not genuine diversity. And nowhere is this more damaging than in its effect on young men, particularly white working-class men. Positive action schemes and diversity targets in public bodies and higher education have, in too many cases, tipped into outright discrimination. This is not equality. It is racism. Martin Luther King dreamed of a society where people would be judged not by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. When did we abandon that principle and decide it was acceptable to discriminate once again? No, I'm sorry, I am going to make progress. Reform will end DEI initiatives across all
The member
Scottish...
has made it clear that she's not taking interventions.
I'm not taking any more interventions. Reform will end DEI initiatives across all Scottish public institutions because, far from delivering fairness, they institutionalise division and discrimination. In our schools, we will withdraw materials produced by activist organisations to protect children from an ideology that's causing real and lasting harm. And while respecting people's personal choices, we will champion genuine equality of opportunity, not quotas or targets that pit one group against another. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, to build a truly equal and united society, reform will speak unapologetically for men as well as women, for working-class boys as well as girls, and for a politics grounded in merit, fairness and shared identity rather than grievance and division. Thank you.
Alex Kerr to be followed by Jenny Minto. Alex Kerr, who has up to 7 minutes.
Right. Thank you, Presiding Officer. At the risk of my party colleagues falling off their seats, I would like to start on a point of agreement with the mover of the motion. It is indisputable that the foundation of any successful nation is strong and sustained economic growth. Without that growth, we will not have the ability to support the public services our people deserve, and we will not be able to lift people out of poverty in the way that we strive to do. While we agree on that much, we part ways there. I do not agree with their claims that the Scottish Government's policy choices are constraining economic growth. In this, as in so many things, Nigel Farage's Reform Party are just plain wrong. They might want to disagree with me, but the numbers from the Office of National Statistics do not lie. Annual real growth in Scotland is outperforming Wales and England. If that is constraining economic growth, then can Reform explain what is happening in England and Wales? Seems to me Westminster could be doing with taking some lessons from the Scottish Government when it comes to economic growth. Further to that, the news from EY's most recent report that Scotland remains the leading destination for investment across the UK outside London is also one that puts paid to the argument that Scotland's economy is not well stewarded by the Scottish Government. It might interest MSPs to know that Scotland has been the leading destination in the UK outside London for the 11th year in a row. 11 years in a row. And in all 11 of those years, it has been the SNP who have been the government in Scotland. Scotland continuously punches well above our weight. We have around 8% of the UK population, but in terms of attracting investment, we have captured 14.8% of all foreign direct investment projects in 2025, well above our 10-year average share of 11.6%. One-third of those planning investments in the UK say they will choose Scotland, up on 27% last year in a moment. Investors with no axe to grind, beyond making sound investments, cite Scotland's highly skilled workforce, strong infrastructure and overall business environment. Does Malcolm Offord think these investors are wrong? Or perhaps Angela Ross? I'll take your intervention now.
Angela Ross.
Thank you. Can I ask if you think it's correct in this country that 1 in 5 are skipping meals because they cannot afford food? Or 1 in 10 of our young people are leaving education and going into unemployment?
Alex Kerr.
No, of course I don't agree with that. But do you also understand that the only country in the UK where child poverty is falling, the only country, is in Scotland? Again, due to the policies like the Scottish Child Payment, which I don't know if you support that, but that policy is causing child poverty to fall in Scotland. Child poverty is not falling in any other nation in the UK. You can shake your head, but that's the reality of the situation. All of these successes and continued growth comes against a challenging global backdrop, having experienced a pandemic, the shock of wars across the globe and other upheavals. You can see that in the number of projects across Europe, which fell by 7%. The number of projects in the UK, the new economic sick man of Europe, fell by 14%. And this brings me back to a point I made earlier in the debate around the nations of the UK and their economic growth rates. Some members might have noticed I only mentioned 3 of the nations that make up the UK for now. The real terms economic growth for Northern Ireland is far and away the strongest of the nations, coming in at 2.1%. That's more than double the others. So how exactly has Northern Ireland achieved this rate of growth? They have achieved this growth because when Scotland was dragged out of the EU against our will, the Boris Johnson Tory government that Malcolm Offord eventually served in a parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Scotland allowed Northern Ireland the unique position of maintaining access to the European single market, while Scotland was denied that access. This is crucial to that continued, thriving economic growth. And the UK's loss of access to the European single market is why it has become the sick man of Europe. So rather than coming here and questioning the SNP's positive record in Scotland's economy, Malcolm Offord should be coming here to apologise for the economic disaster that his boss, Nigel Farage, has brought upon this country and our neighbours in England and Wales. A recent paper by a team of academics, in a moment, including Assistant Professor of Economics Eleonora Alabresi at the University of Bath, found that Scotland has been made almost £30 billion a year worse off and is the worst hit of all the devolved nations. I'll take your intervention now.
Gillian McDougall.
The amendment praises progressive taxation. Can the member point to a single major public service that is performing better today than it was before Scotland became the highest taxed part of the UK?
Thank you.
Alex Carr.
Thank you for your intervention. As has been mentioned earlier, that extra £1.8 billion that we raised through progressive taxation, which, by the way, has not led to the sky falling in, as was claimed beforehand, has led to us being able to fund things like the Scottish child payment, which means that in Scotland, child poverty is falling, while in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, it is not falling. So I assume members over there welcome that, but I'd like to hear that maybe in some of their speeches. You know, to come towards a close, I mean, Malcolm Offord is not a stupid man. I know this. He's had a successful life in business outside politics, as his numerous homes, cars and boats can clearly attest to. Which means that Malcolm Offord must see the reality of the continued damage that has been unleashed upon the people of Scotland due to his boss, Nigel Farage's Brexit obsession. I know, though, that just as another branch manager, like the role Anna Sauer plays for Labour, for fear of Mr Offord's head office in London, that he will not be able to admit these facts today, and for the rest of the parliamentary term, in fact. In summary, the only route to further and faster economic growth is to rejoin the European Union, and the only way to escape broken Brexit Britain, to make this a reality, is with Scottish independence. Absolutely. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Jenny Minto, up to 7 minutes.
Morantang Officer Riali. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I want to start with the words of one of my constituents. I am not a politician, nor do I ever wish to become one. I am a leather worker, a farmer, and a father and a business owner. I want to spend my life building my business, raising my children, and living quietly in Scotland. However, I also believe that when ordinary people see a problem in society, they should not be afraid to speak up and propose solutions. My constituent wanted to talk to me because he wants to find a way for Scotland to become a normal, independent country. And Angela Ross's analogy of a crossroads, I think, is a fair one. I think our decision as to which track we will follow is a different one, but from my perspective, it is independence that we should be choosing. On Monday, I met with my constituent and his wife. He spoke about the impact that Brexit had had on his business, how that because of that vote, his order book collapsed. He had to find new ways of marketing and promoting his business to ensure he and his family survived. He spoke about the support that he had received from the SNP to expand his business. He spoke about the support he had received from the Scottish Government to employ apprentices, both of which have allowed him to expand his business to a third workshop. This has meant that, I'll finish my story first if you don't mind, both of which have meant that the people have remained in Argyll and Bute, working in good jobs, contributing to the community and reducing population decline.
Angela Ross.
Thank you. Thank you for giving way. I just want to ask, do you not think that the 2014 referendum would not have taken you out of Europe in the same way that Brexit did? You would have caused your own Brexit.
Jenny Minto. Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you for your intervention. No, I don't. I believe that Scotland is a country that will be welcomed into the European Union. We have the most amazing resources, whether that's people, whether it's our landscape, whether it's the universities, whether it's the businesses, whether it's the university, whether it's the energy, but also from a strategic point of view, Scotland is incredibly important to Europe. We spoke about the benefits of living in Argyll and Bute and how Scotland will be the best independent country in the world. Now, this is not the empty rhetoric that I have heard this afternoon from Reform. This is hope, this is dreams, this is someone who cares about Scotland. Now, like others had noticed, I hadn't intended to speak in this debate, as I don't do the dog whistle politics that some people like in this chamber. But having had this conversation on Monday, I was compelled to do so politely. I would suggest to Reform UK that this motion is an insult to hard-working Scots, whether they work in our schools, our hospitals, our small businesses. The utter negativity of the motion shows a complete lack of awareness of the amazing stuff that is happening across Scotland. And if I may touch on a couple of these. The reform motion mixes up net zero policies, as my colleague Jackie Dunbar has talked about. It says that net zero is harming individuals' opportunities and economic growth. Now, if any of the reform members had spoken in my colleague Mackay Chapman's debate on university education, they would have heard me talk about the Scottish Association for Marine Science. That's in Oban, in my constituency. Scientists there are doing lots of things. They are examining the life cycle and behaviours of sea lice in order to tackle one of the main issues in finfish aquaculture, using underwater robotic vehicles to identify entanglement risks to aquatic mammals, restoring many of the bottlenecks in the emerging seaweed farming industry and providing crucial marine mammal data for marine renewables, using net zero as a way to employ people and improve our businesses. This strengthens our communities and expands the economy, helping businesses to cope with climate change. And also having a world-class marine science research centre like SAMS has allowed Highlands and Islands Enterprise to develop its European Marine Science Park, bringing specialist companies in high-growth sectors to the area, improving repopulation in my constituency. Now, Angela Ross, you talked a lot about education, and I have to say there's one thing that I agree with you about, but you're contradicting one of your fellow party members, in my opinion. I agree with you. Arts is not an optional extra. Art is one of the most important subjects that we can all engage with for many reasons, for our mental well-being and also for the betterment of our country. I am interested to know if name's gone, my apologies, if Mr Clare thinks this is a pointless subject. Yesterday I met Sunnyside Primary School in Glasgow and we were talking about climate change. We spoke about the Celtic rainforest. We talked about the Amazonian rainforest and the fact that Scotland is a proud host, I suppose, of a rainforest. In my own constituency, Dunoon Grammar School won the world's best school prize for community collaboration. Now, that's the kind of schooling, that's the kind of pupils, that's the kind of education we should be presenting. Duncan Massey talked about grid infrastructure. Well, in Kintyre, in my constituency in Mid-Argyll, £400 million of investment, of infrastructure upgrade, and that is there to increase grid capacity. So we do have that investment happening in Scotland. We've also got investment in distribution enhancements to ensure that we have network resilience projects. And why is that? Because we've got climate change and we need to improve it. I'd also like to reflect on Willie Rennie's comments. Bute is welcomed families from Syria who are now an integral part of the island. In Loch Gilphead, Ukrainian families have settled and helped revitalise the town's main street with 2 new businesses. As the proclaimers sing, they're all Scotland's story and they're all worth the same. And I would also like to hugely associate my comments, my agreement with Willie Rennie about the amazing Nigerian and Baltic staff that are working in Balnacarran Nursing Home in St Andrews. And I also agree with Labour's motion. The importance of reducing inequalities is so important, and I would reflect on Jenny Young's comments in the Joe Cox speech last week and wholeheartedly agree with her sentiments. And I think that is where we should be coming together in this Parliament, working together to improve things for everyone. Oh, I've lost my final page. Oh no, I've never done that before.
The members should be bringing her remarks to a close.
I am about to. I think this is how we improve things, not by the constant negativity we hear from the blue benches on my left. Presiding Officer, 1984 was written in Barnhill and Jura in Argyll and Bute. I cannot help but think of George Orwell's warning that language can be used to distort reality. My constituent reminded me why I came to this Parliament.
The member must wind up.
Not to tell people that Scotland cannot succeed, but to help build a Scotland that does.
Thank you. We now move to closing speeches, and I call on Alex Cole-Hamilton, who has up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, this was an opportunity for Reform to prove everybody wrong, to pepper the chamber this afternoon with speeches measured in tone and full of bright ideas to fix the things that are wrong in Scotland. But we've heard none of that today. As Maya Angelou reminds us, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Language matters, and I was really struck by something Jackie Dunbar said when she referenced the language that we've heard from Reform. And Lord Offord often talks in the same breath about the idea of cohesion, and then talks about strangers, fighting-age men, our people. And then I reflect, and I make no causal link between this and the attacks in Edinburgh on the weekend, but we did hear that half-naked man wielding an axe, shouting about protecting our country. Let that sink in. Because language of displacement, of othering, is the antithesis of the cohesion that Lord Offord speaks about so regularly. Liberals believe in reform, of course we do. We led, in the Whig government in 1832. I will give way to Amanda Bland.
Amanda Bland.
Just interesting hearing about language, and I agree with you. We need to be really careful with the language that we use in this Parliament, referring to other parties as they discuss me and individuals as Jack in the Box. Would you agree that that is inappropriate?
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I really fail to see a moral equivalence between the references we've just heard and what is effectively the language of the Third Reich in some cases. Liberals believe fundamentally in reform, in challenging the old order of things, and we stand by that, cleaning up our politics, accountability and making governments accountable to their people. And our approach to reform is about lifting people up.
Point of order, Duncan Massey.
Language was unacceptable, Presiding Officer.
As the standing orders make clear, it is a matter of whether a comment is in relation to an individual or whether it is a point of debate, and the point was not specifically aimed at an individual. I'll respond and return to Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Presiding Officer, I think it's important to address that. When you talk about displacement and othering, that is the language of the Third Reich. I meant no inference that there was any suggestion or implication that Reform adopt the policies of the Third Reich, but we've got to be very careful when we talk about displacement, replacement theory and othering, which is happening on a widespread basis as the Overton window has shifted. I apologise if people have taken offence to that. If I have time, if I can get the time back.
Daniel Johnson.
I'm very grateful to the member for giving way. I wonder if you might agree with me, is that while parties or individuals may not be fascist, they do need to think about whether they might be enabling those that absolutely do proclaim and explicitly pursue fascism.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I absolutely agree with Daniel Johnson. The struggle for progress and equality is never truly won. We have to win it with every generation. We see in the rhetoric the measure of the challenge that falls to our generation. Liberal Democrats believe in fixing what's broken. And let's talk about the things that we need to reform. And one of the things that absolutely is broken is our climate. And I have heard several speakers from the Reform Party talk about the climate emergency as if it isn't a real thing. Net zero is part of how we fix it. And it's not incompatible to support jobs in the North Sea, but recognise that we have a duty as a nation to play our part in driving towards net zero, because climate change is the final boss of the 21st century. If Reform don't like the migration crisis that's been caused by war in continental Africa and other places like that, then they are going to be horrified by the migration crisis that happens as a result of climate change making large parts of our world completely uninhabitable. We also talk about aspects of our economy being broken. Of course that's true, and we need to reform things like planning, skills and housing to make sure that it's easier to build things here, to invest in Scotland, that we've got the skills pipeline that we need, and making sure that there are places for those people to live, and that we build things again, we think things again, that the founders who create businesses in Scotland are encouraged to keep them in Scotland, employ Scottish people, and make sure that they are sustaining the economy that then funds our public services. Our health service needs fixed. My goodness, our health service needs fixed. We've heard that several times in excellent speeches around the chamber about the waiting times, about the time that people are waiting for treatment and care. And we have said many times in hospital that it is not a deficiency of our hospitals, it's a deficiency of social care, that we don't have provision. I'm afraid I've given away enough now, and I must make progress. I must make progress. But by investing in social care, we can get those 2,000 Scots out of hospital when they would much rather be there, be at their home or in a care home than taking up a hospital bed. And to do that, we absolutely need to recognise that migration, inward migration, is a fundamental part of it. That actually there are many care vacancies. It's not about getting our people, as Malcolm Offord says, into work. There are lots of jobs that are going unfilled by Scots right now, and people from other countries who desperately want to provide that care and support to our people.
The member cannot take an intervention as is already an additional time.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. So we need that immigration, but we also need to recognise that we are a home for refugees. Scotland has a proud history of offering safe harbour to those fleeing war and persecution and intolerance. And we should proudly remember that and embrace that, because it's so much part of our tapestry and part of our heritage. And I'll finish by saying this, Presiding Officer. The title of this motion is 5 years to 2031. Like that is some kind of countdown. And I would ask Reform to reflect on the use of their language today, of the attacks they have levelled. The attacks they have levelled against communities, against people in this chamber, and recognise that it's going to be a very long 5 years if we have to endure many more debates like this. Thank you very much.
I call on Tim Eagle, who has up to 5 minutes.
I will try and keep to that time, Presiding Officer. Well, it's certainly been an interesting debate to listen to, hasn't it? And from the, I think my colleague Murray Fraser said the word salad that we had, I wasn't quite sure what I should zone in on. But I want to start with the title, because Scotland says Scotland needs reform. And on that point, I think there would be some broad agreement across the chamber. For after 19 years of the SNP, I would certainly say that Scotland is in desperate need of change. Reform certainly seemed to have arrived in the Scottish Parliament and in politics as some sort of revolutionary force. The reality, I think, for me, at least at the beginning here, is far less impressive. The foxes in the henhouse had barely unpacked their suitcases when they were putting the media in a pen outside, which I thought was pretty shocking. The truth is, being in opposition, Thomas Kerr, you can shout from the sidelines all you like, but you shout enough online and nobody's listening anymore. The truth is that being in opposition is not about posting slogans on social media or unilaterally declaring yourself the voice of the people. It is about consistently holding governments to account. And that is exactly what the Scottish Conservatives have done and are doing and will do to take the Scotland forward over the next 5 years. When businesses were crying out for support, like those who contacted me in Lossiemouth, it was the Scottish Conservatives who repeatedly challenged the SNP on non-domestic rates. We led the calls for a pause on NDR, but the SNP refused to listen. Just this morning, I spoke by chance to a constituent I met outside this Parliament who, having travelled over 100 miles, is standing in the sun just to make the point that he is trapped in a cycle of despair because the empty property rates on a shop he cannot sell that he had his entire life are taking his pension. Funeral parlours in Murray met me to say that hikes simply cannot be afforded and so they are forced to increase the costs of a funeral. Yesterday's statement on non-domestic rates was a non-event. Yet another discussion, yet another delay, an act to action when what our businesses need to hear is when change will finally happen. When others were afraid to discuss welfare reform, we were prepared to have that conversation. Not because it is easy, but because responsible government requires difficult conversations. When Scotland's ferries descended into chaos, it was us, and it is the Scottish Conservatives who continue to relentlessly pursue answers. A tragedy is still going on to the massive detriment of my constituents on the west coast of Scotland. When are we going to see CalMac and CMAL brought together and local people on the board so decisions are truly empowered? When promises on the A9, the A83, the A75, the A96 were delayed, it was the Scottish Conservatives who stood up for the communities being left continuously campaigning for the SNP to put the money in the pot. We still have no timeline for the Nairn, Elgin or Keith bypasses. When concerns were raised about the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, we led the opposition. When concerns were raised about the Hate Crimes Act, we fought the fight. When our fishing industry needed a voice, we were there for them. When our farmers needed certainty, we stood up for them too. And that was against a new rural support plan that is less use than the proverbial chocolate teapot. And then Reform mentioned immigration. In my own Highlands and Islands region, communities have raised questions, legitimate questions, about pressures on housing, services and local capacity. The situation around Cameron Barracks has been an example where people of all political persuasions have quite reasonably asked for clarity and reassurance. I do not approach immigration by seeking to divide communities or inflame tensions, as Reform have appeared to do. I do, though, seek solutions, even when those solutions are difficult and even when they are unpopular in parts of this chamber. Happy to take an intervention, yes.
Victor Curry.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Britain is a multiracial country with people of all backgrounds that call this their home. And when we have uncontrolled, unmanaged migration, those additional numbers create pressures on our hospitals, in our schools and elsewhere that are felt by people of all backgrounds. Those are the people we're standing up for, and the only people talking about race are other parties, not Reform.
Tim Eagle.
I think you have to inwardly reflect on what you've just said, because that is not what I think believe me, I don't want to back up any other party in this chamber, but I think there is the point here that actually even what we heard from the Liberal Democrats and Labour today was that actually your language is different to that outside of this chamber. What you are saying outside is inflaming tension in a way that we don't need. The language you are using outside, the language Thomas Kerr, who was shouting me a minute ago, is using online, the language that your leader down in London is using, Nigel Farage, is horrendous. That it is bad language. There is absolutely inappropriate language. Just stop. Your language is inappropriate.
Through the
you need
chair,
to learn
please.
how to do this properly. The Scottish Conservatives recognise that a strong economy is not some optional extra. It is the foundation upon which everything else depends. And this is, I do agree with Reform on, I do agree with others on. It's all about the economy. Good public services require a strong economy. Good jobs require a strong economy. Rising living standards require a strong economy. That means being prepared to think differently. Scotland definitely does need reforming. But reform is not a slogan. Reform is not a marketing exercise. Reform is not a newly arrived party self-righteously declaring itself the answer to every question. Reform is in the hard, often unglamorous work of challenging failure, standing up for business, supporting communities and demanding better from this government. That is what the Scottish Conservatives have done. It is what we are doing today, and it is the common sense we need if we want a brighter future for Scotland. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I call on Chou. Manny Vannon, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to say that I'm grateful to speak for this motion, but honestly, I'm just a bit bored. It's one that manages the considerable feat of somehow being simultaneously vague enough to mean nothing and then specific enough to be so wrong as the trans immigrant in the room. But more importantly, as an educator, I feel almost that I have a moral or civic responsibility. But also as a writer, I believe in examining authorial intent. The motion's likely author, Nigel Farage, isn't in the room, but seeing as he's not here, Presiding Officer, we'll settle for Malcolm Offord, the ex-Lord Offord of Garvo, who may take some time adjusting to the acoustics that do not come with upholstered red benches, but he's a man who told Scotland during a cost of living crisis about his 6 homes, his 5 cars and his 6 boats, as though he was speaking at an estate inventory rather than the political stump. Though I note for those in Inverclyde, which itself refused to vote the member in, for those who cannot afford 1 home, let alone 6, hobbies in the English Channel feel somewhat remote. The motion itself, and I'd say the standard or lack thereof that it sets, is simply just sad. It calls for evidence-based policy that commands broad confidence, so let's apply that test. On net zero, the motion warns that environmental policy risks delivering net zero economic growth, a striking position from the member himself who, in his maiden speech to the House of Lords in January 2022, declared, and I quote, that COP 2026 proved our leadership still counts as we show it is possible to simultaneously grow our economy while cutting our emissions. And that the UK had, within quotes, the capital, the brains and the political will to meet the climate challenge. When challenged on this during the campaign, he said he was never enthusiastic, that he was simply reading lines that he was given as a minister, and added in infinite scientific precision that the world heats up and cools down, so I don't want to get into an argument about science. This overheated, sweaty Parliament chamber cannot afford that position. The world's heating up. And as a man, as a man who disowns his own words the moment they become inconvenient is not really a reliable guide to evidence-based policy. Now to the immigration passage of this motion, because the contradiction here is just embarrassing and shows a degree of inefficiency and ineptitude that even the most hard-pressed migrant wouldn't be guilty of. The motion begins by expressing concern about illegal immigration and calls for action to reduce incentives for illegal immigration. One sentence later, without a definition, without a distinction, it pivots to restricting non-citizens from accessing social housing and Scottish welfare. Presiding officer, illegal immigrants and non-citizens are not the same people. They are not the same legal category. They are not the same policy problem. And conflating them isn't just an oversight, it's reform's entire political strategy. The people most affected by further restrictions would not just be those who arrived here illegally. They would be EU nationals with settled status, migrant NHS workers, care workers, teachers, and skilled workers on visa. The people the members' own manifesto acknowledges that Scotland needs. There is no definition offered, just non-citizen, a category so broad it encompasses almost everyone in Scotland who was not born here, the overwhelming majority of whom who are entirely here lawfully and paying into the system that they are being threatened with exclusion from. This motion says it wants to tackle illegal immigration. What it actually proposes, however, would fall on legal and skilled migrants. This is not a policy for controlling borders. It is a policy for making Scotland hostile to foreign-born people in general, and this chamber should say so plainly. In the member's own record on immigration, he says he supports controlled immigration, but his own manifesto calls the Conservative years of 2021 to 2024 the Boris wave of destructive mass immigration. The member served as a minister throughout that entire period, appointed by Boris Johnson, reappointed by Liz Truss, reappointed by Rishi Sunak. If the Boris wave was a scandal, he was the minister who sailed on it, with all of his 6 boats, presumably. And on immigration statistics, when the member appeared on Question Time in December 2025, he claimed that only 1 million people came to the UK in the entire 20th century. The Ferret rated this false. He said there's not a single turbine blade made in Scotland in this very chamber a few moments ago. That's false, 23%. They say they don't agree with controlled immigration, but want me to be deported, apparently. They say they want immigrants to work, but they don't want to give them the right to work. They want to fix the care sector, but they want to cut health visas for skilled carers. They want cohesion, but won't support ESL courses for migrants. On social cohesion, the member and his party cower in fear of trans people who constitute 0.44% of Scotland's population, make homophobic jokes about George Michael and his bereaved partner at a rugby club dinner, while ignoring Reform's own Aberdeenshire by-election candidate, who reportedly made social media posts about women's jaws hurting 2 minutes into oral sex. Shameful. The motion calls for apprenticeships, literacy investment, diverse pathways into employment, but the Fraser of Allender Institute found that Reform's tax proposals would turn Scotland's income tax net position from a surplus to a deficit, a recurring annual cost, not a one-off. There is no credible pathway provided to fund better schools, better apprenticeships, or better mental health services on that arithmetic acrobatic, and Reform has no answers but more task forces and bad economics. Presiding officer, this motion is titled 5 years to 2031. The member founded a campaign in 2014 called Vote No Borders. He now campaigns to stop the boats. He championed net zero as a minister and abandoned it as a leader. He says non-citizens when he means illegal immigrants and hopes nobody reads the small print. He pledges his salary to a charity he controls with his personal assistant with £12,000 in the bank. He boasted of 6 homes on live television in a constituency with a housing crisis. He called his boat Braveheart. Presiding officer, the story about Scottish independence, and he sailed it in the English Channel during an ongoing election campaign in Inverclyde. And hey, a man's got to have hobbies, and Scotland does need reform. But it and many of Scotland's and Reform's own MSPs can do so much better than whatever this is. I will not be supporting this motion, and I stand for a politics of care, presiding officer, not whatever it is of care. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Donald McKinnon. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Saturday, I attended a food festival in my constituency, part of the inaugural Hebridean Refugee Week. Families from Ukraine, Syria and Afghanistan sharing their food with a packed Stornoway Town Hall. It was a wonderful event that showed our community at its best, welcoming and open. Now to the motion. There is no doubt that there is much in Scotland that could be better, and it must be better. But the populist approach that we've heard from Reform relies on simple solutions to complex issues and blames others for our problems. It's right that we debate where we can do better, but that should not be done through division. One benefit of the Reform motion is it covered so much ground that I can talk about just about anything in my contribution today. And ask the member for Helen and Year, it will be no surprise that I approach a debate on what is not working in Scotland today by focusing on the issue that dominates daily life for many of my constituents, the ferry service, as we've already heard from Tim Eagle. For island communities, ferries are not a luxury but a lifeline service. Yet since January 2023, more than 10,000 CalMac sailings have been cancelled because of technical faults. Families, patients, businesses and visitors have all paid the price for a system that has too often failed to provide the certainty and reliability that island communities deserve. My colleague Daniel Johnson spoke about public bodies, and it is increasingly clear that the governance arrangements that sit behind our ferry service are not working. The tripartite model of Transport Scotland, CMAL and CalMac is failing islanders. A lack of clear lines of accountability, the organisations pointing the finger at one another when things go wrong, and ultimately an unsatisfactory service being delivered, all point to a need for reform of the governance. Last week at the Scottish Affairs Committee in Westminster, CalMac CEO Duncan Mackay indicated that he thought a merger of CalMac and CMAL would be possible. I urge Ivan Mackay to look closely at ferry governance as he considers public service reform. Now that I've got my need to talk about ferries out of the way, I'd like to turn to some of the contributions we have heard in the debate so far. I'd like to associate myself with the comments from the Minister earlier and others around the Chamber who have condemned recent violence on our streets, and we must call it out for what it is. I welcome the contribution from Willie Rennie as well earlier on when he talked about migrant workers in our social care sector. And it is important that when we are talking about this, that we value the contributions that these people make in our social care services. I also want to acknowledge the contribution from Jenny Young, who spoke powerfully about the need for political parties to work together and to reject the politics of hate, division and violence. That message is particularly important in an era when political discourse can too easily become toxic. Her remarks were a timely reminder that disagreement must never become dehumanisation. Along with members from across the Chamber, I joined her in marking the 10th anniversary of the murder of Joe Cox. Joe Cox's belief that there is more that unites us than divides us remains as relevant today as it was when she first said it. If there is a common thread running through this debate, it is that people expect better from us. They expect reliable infrastructure, effective public services and a politics that delivers solutions rather than division. For the people of our islands, this must begin with fixing our ferry service. But the wider challenges facing all of us is to ensure that government works better, public bodies work smarter and politics works in the interests of those we represent. That is a responsibility we share, and it is the challenge we must all meet. I'm done.
I now call on Gillian to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, in the last few weeks I have spoken to people who are worried about going into certain parts of our towns and cities at certain times. Why? Because of the colour of their skin, their beliefs, their background, their way of life. And this is not something which is solely impacting on our largest cities. Social media makes sure of that. This cannot, must not become normalised, excused in any way. And I start with this point, Presiding Officer, because we have in the course of this debate heard speeches which have stoked tension and bred division. And words do matter, as many contributors have said today. Words used in our national parliament matter in particular. And I would call out once again the members, particularly in reform, in fact only in reform, who have used this debate and others since the election to sow further seeds of division in our society. Because if history teaches us anything, Presiding Officer, it's that words have consequences, not just on how people feel about themselves and their place in society, but also words can be seen as an encouragement for action, for intimidation, for attacks, for further division. And I will call that language out every time. I will in a moment, if you let me make some further progress. Daniel Johnson, I think, made an excellent contribution, a heartfelt contribution, which I would pay tribute to. He called out reform's language, and he called out the fact that Malcolm offered and others stand up and say they condemn violence in the Chamber, But that doesn't make up for everything else that is said by Reform members, both in here and outside. It doesn't make up for what is inferred, and it doesn't make up for when they stay silent. And I would pay particular attention to the contribution also made by Tim Eagle, when he rightly called out the Reform's double standards, both in here and elsewhere. And I also want to pay particular tribute to the very moving speech by Jenny Young and her reminder once again about Jo Cox and 10 years since her death. I didn't have the opportunity to sit through her members' debate, but I have listened back to some of the speeches. It was a very powerful members' debate, and I thank her for bringing that debate to the Chamber. She's right today to point to the fact that whatever politicians or tech giants say and see as just words, other people see as a call to action, and they must reflect on that. And on that point, I'll call Thomas Kerr.
Thomas Kerr.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking the intervention, and I think she is correct about some language. So she said that she didn't only want to call out reform, so will she call out Alex Cole-Hamilton for mentioning the Third Reich? Will she call out Daniel Johnson for insinuating fascism? Will she call out other members who have used the words fascist and racist in this chamber for people who have genuine concerns about illegal migration? That is shameful, and surely double standards should be called out.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think the members that he mentioned did respond to those points during the debate, and I think it is particularly rich and deeply ironic for somehow Reform to come to this debate and somehow count themselves as the victims and the people that are hard done by. Presiding Officer, the irony is not lost on me. Presiding Officer, Willie Rennie was quite right to say that there are difficult issues that we do need to discuss, both in this chamber and as a society, and he's quite right. But also what I think we need to point out, and we shouldn't confuse the two, and I know that he doesn't, is we also need to point out when people use disinformation, deliberate disinformation, to provide for fear and disharmony in our society. And I think that's a good point to bring in Helen McDade as well.
Helen McDade.
I just wanted to go back to the comment about Jo Cox and ask whether you wish to also extend that sympathy to David Amos's family.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course I would, Presiding Officer, yes. Presiding Officer, I think some of the level of disinformation in this debate has been truly outstanding. I think the most ridiculous is that somehow there is apparently some grand establishment plan to indoctrinate our children in nursery. But we also have what's mentioned in the motion about housing. The motion would have you believe that people are queue jumping into social housing or being erroneously supported through the benefits system. And I would point to the fact that I published a statement jointly with Shelter Scotland on 12th of June, correcting inaccurate claims made in recent Reform Party commentary and highlighting that refugees do not receive priority for housing over other households facing homelessness. We have strong homelessness rights in Scotland, and I am proud of that. But our housing rights apply equally to all of those who are homeless through no fault of their own. And Shelter Scotland support our position, noting that these rights protect us all, and any backward step weakens the rights for all of us. Briefly, yeah.
Patrick Harvey.
I am grateful, and I recognise that obviously regulation of areas like social media is out with the control of the Scottish Government. But does the Cabinet Secretary accept that across a range of different portfolios there is a need for the Government to adopt a coordinated disinformation strategy? Individual bits of it are happening, but I don't believe they're joined up enough to be effective yet.
Cabinet Secretary.
I think Patrick Harvey has pointed to something which the Government needs to reflect on, and I think we all need to reflect on, is how we deal with that disinformation, not just as a Government, but I think working with third sector partners, as we did with Shelter in that example that I gave. And it's something that I am, and I know other ministers are given very serious reflection on. Presiding Officer, George Adam and others talked about Brexit. 10 years since the Brexit referendum. A new analysis by the University of Warwick on regional economic impacts of Brexit indicates Scotland is the hardest hit devolved nation, with a 9% gross value added loss by 2023. Again, Presiding Officer, the irony of the architects of Brexit coming here to this chamber, wringing their hands about the state of the economy, is something which I find deeply offensive. Also offensive is this discussion about migration, without the reflections of, as Michelle Campbell, Jenny Minto and others have spoken about, is the fact that Scotland needs people. Scotland needs migration. Migration is vital for supporting our sustainable communities, our economies and our public services in Scotland. And Scotland should also be a welcoming nation in terms of refugees and those seeking asylum. We have a long and proud history of offering safety and sanctuary to those fleeing war. It's our international obligation. It is also our moral obligation, and we are right to do so. Presiding Officer, we need to think very carefully about how we conduct ourselves in this chamber. When I walk into this chamber each and every time, I remind myself about what an honour and a privilege it is to be here, but also what a responsibility it is as well. And I hope all other members feel that too. Across parties, and even sometimes within parties, we will disagree, and you can see that in the other amendments that have been lodged today, with critiques of the Scottish Government on policies and delivery and ferries. We got that into the debate. The member will be pleased. But that is democracy and that is debate. That is the discussions that Willie Rennie and others challenged us to have the dignity and respect of people's questions, but also for the questioner to have some responsibility about how that question is framed. Because you know what none of the amendments do today is they don't come into this chamber and blame others. They don't come into the chamber and blame minority groups. And that, Presiding Officer, is in the difference of the type of debate we could have. Presiding Officer, I'll close my remarks today by quoting from a time of reflection which Rabbi Rubin gave only a few weeks ago. He was talking about a celebration and an event he went to where children, as he put it, were simply being children, learning, celebrating and looking confidently towards the future. He closed by saying, "However, I was left with a question. Why should that feel extraordinary? Why should it be remarkable that children can celebrate who they are without fear? What can we do to make that spirit a reality, not only for Jews, but for everyone, people of faith and of none, and people who simply seek to live their lives with meaning, with dignity and happiness? Perhaps that is a challenge that is before us all." Presiding Officer, I think not for the first time Rabbi Rubin has been correct, and I hope we all rise to that challenge today.
Thank you. I call on Thomas Kerr to wind up the debate. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When I arrived in this chamber for the first time, I used the phrase "the fox is in the henhouse." And judging by the reaction of our opponents today, I'd say that that saying is pretty real. Alex Cole-Hamilton compared us to the Third Reich. Daniel Johnson used the word fascism. The irrelevant lot sitting there tried to launch us. No, I won't. The irrelevant lot sitting behind
Excuse me, Mr. Eagle.
The irrelevant lot sitting behind me had dare lecture us about how good an opposition have been without a hint of irony of where they now sit and how far they've fallen down in the polls. And we were lectured about grievance and division by the SNP. You really could not make it up. A party whose whole thing is about division is lecturing us on it. You couldn't make it up. Presiding Officer, all of us in this chamber are here to serve Scotland, elected by its people to do a job of delivering. But we can only do so successfully if the people buy into it. And for all the bravado that we've heard from SNP MSPs today, let me roll out some cold, hard facts for them. Over 2 million people did not vote in May's election. The SNP won under 900,000 votes, and they're down 10% since 2021. And they lost 6 seats. Now, I'm not saying this to be gleeful. They did win. I'm saying it because there is a growing disillusionment out there in the country against politics and politicians. Scotland is hurting. And inside our forgotten working class communities, they feel abandoned by a political establishment that has ignored them. They see a First Minister who won't comment on police investigations like Murrow or the attack on Calders in Edinburgh, but will comment on another horrific attack because it suits a political narrative. We in Reform condemn all acts of violence that take place in our streets. We've said it once, we'll say it again, it doesn't matter how it works. And that brings me to this afternoon's debate. Oh, I'm out for a laugh, go for it.
George Adam.
I'm glad you're up for a laugh. We talk about respect in this chamber, and you've just shown absolutely none whatsoever there, Mr Kerr. But one of the things I would say is, Mr Kerr talks about he condemns violence and everything else, but his language, particularly his language, is to blame for everything that happened across our country the last weekend. Surely he must take responsibility for that and look at himself in the mirror and own up to that. Surely.
Thomas Kerr.
I'll tell you what's respect, First Presiding Officer, taking an intervention which the member didn't do when I tried to intervene on him. It's quite funny how that works. Now, I will not take the blame for what happened in our streets. It is utterly shocking. Any act of violence should be called out. But to try and put that at my personal door is utterly shameful, and the member should hang his head in shame. And that brings me to this afternoon's debate. Look, SNP members can delude and shout themselves. SNP members can delude themselves all they like by shouting that they won and that we lost. But John Swinney's government is built on sand and it will quickly sink. So go for it, delude yourselves. We have seen this show before, and just ask Keir Starmer in the Labour Party where it gets you just a few years in. Now, this afternoon's debate is titled Scotland Needs Reform, 5 years until 2031. Why? Because this is the start of our party showing the country that reform can and will win. And you've heard in this debate real people with real expertise offering a real alternative. Reform's 17 MSPs have sat in this chamber and used our time to evaluate our broken politics. Now we offer solutions. Presiding Officer, Scotland is broken and Scotland needs reform. And nowhere is that truer than Scotland's broken housing system. Housing is one of the biggest issues facing Scotland today, not because politicians talk about it so often, but because ordinary people are living with the consequences of SNP failure on housing. Successive governments have failed to build enough homes, failed to plan for the future demand and failed to put the interests of local communities first. What's the result of this? A housing system that is under immense pressure. Waiting lists are high, temporary accommodation numbers are high, homelessness is high, private rents are high, and the list goes on. Yet too often, when these concerns are raised, politicians reach for the excuses rather than solutions. Scots deserve better than that. The truth is that housing is governed by one unavoidable reality: supply and demand. If demand rises faster than supply, pressure increases. If more people require housing than there are homes available, waiting lists grow. That is just simple maths. I'm going to make some progress. And that is why Reform Scotland believes we must have an honest conversation about local connection and housing allocation. Because people who have spent years contributing to a community should not feel like strangers in their own communities. People who were born in an area, people who work there, who pay their taxes, who volunteer there, who raise families there should know that their connection matters. A local connection must carry weight. Unfortunately, too many people across Scotland feel that their concerns are dismissed the moment that they are raised, particularly when those concerns relate to migration and asylum. Now, let me be clear. Compassion and common sense are not mutually exclusive. A country can be compassionate while also recognising political limits. And for years, too many politicians in this chamber have refused to engage honestly with the housing issue, and now the public is feeling the consequences. What they should not receive is condemnation for asking perfectly reasonable questions. The truth is that Scotland's housing challenges cannot be solved by pretending difficult issues do not exist. They can only be solved by action, and that means building significantly more homes, no more broken promises. It means recognising that every housing policy must begin with the people already here who are struggling to find a place to call home, because government exists to serve its citizens, and that should be the starting point of every decision made in this chamber. The interests of Scottish residents should come first. So Reform's position is straightforward. Build more homes, prioritise local connection, restore fairness to the housing allocation, recognise the pressures created by rising demand, put the people of Scotland first, not prioritise strangers who broke the rules and jumped the queue to get here. Presiding Officer, Scotland is broken and Scotland needs reform. Reform has arrived in this chamber. Back our motion and let's get to work.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on Scotland Needs Reform, 5 years to 2031. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion 461 in the name of Neil Gray on motion on legislative consent, National Security State Threats Bill, UK legislation. Let's call on Neil Gray to speak to and move the motion. 7 minutes, please, Mr Gray.
Presiding Officer, thank you. I move the motion in my name. I'd like first to note my thanks and appreciation to Parliament for expediting the consideration of this motion on legislative consent. It's regrettable that we are having to expedite the scrutiny on an LCM due to the UK Government's timetabling for the bill. However, I want to make progress with this this evening to facilitate the passage of the bill. While I appreciate the UK Government is of the view that the bill is reserved in its entirety, the accelerated timetable for the UK Parliament has put us in an unfortunate position of having to suspend standing orders to ensure that this Parliament is able to give its view on the bill before our recess. It is the UK Government's intention to pass the National Security States Threat Bill before UK Parliament begins its recess in July. Given that, this motion will be the Scottish Parliament's only opportunity to express its view on whether to consent to certain provisions in the bill as set out in my legislative consent memorandum. I am today recommending that the Parliament agrees to the motion to provide legislative consent to those aspects of the UK Government's National Security States Threats Bill amending Scottish legislation, specifically the Criminal Procedure Scotland Act 1995. The National Security State Threats Bill makes provision for the designation of bodies that are involved in threat activity, which has been linked to a foreign power within a framework modelled on prescription under the Terrorism Act 2000. This means that the UK Home Secretary may designate a body if they believe it may be linked with foreign power threat activity and considers that designating the body is necessary to protect the safety or interests of the United Kingdom. New criminal offences will apply in relation to these designated bodies, including proxies being used by states to carry out hostile activities in the UK. The areas of law covered by the bill are largely reserved, or else the provisions extend to England and Wales only. However, the provisions which create offences related to designated bodies subsequently expands the class of prisoners to whom specific provisions will apply upon release. The schedule of the bill amends the Criminal Procedure Scotland Act 1995 to apply these measures here in Scotland. This means that the sentencing and release regime for individuals convicted of these new state threat offences will be brought in line with the existing release process for some national security and terrorist prisoners. That means that they would be referred to the Parole Board for Scotland after serving 2/3 of their sentence, and if not granted parole at that time, they would be reviewed again for parole up to 12 months following. As a result, Scottish ministers will be required to take on responsibilities for referring any such prisoners to the Parole Board for Scotland, which will extend ministers' executive functions regarding the release of these types of prisoners. Therefore, the Scottish Government considers that the legislative consent of the Scottish Parliament is required in relation to these amendments, as the changes being proposed would alter the executive competence of Scottish ministers. The reasoning behind this view has been set out to the UK Government. However, my officials have not received a response from them at this time. The changes are expected to have little to no operational impact on the Scottish Prison Service, the Parole Board for Scotland and Justice Social Work Services in Scotland, given that there are expected to be few prisoners sentenced under these new offences, just as there are currently no national security prisoners held in Scottish prisoners. However, while the operational impact resulting from these changes is expected to be minimal, I would still advise the Parliament to give legislative consent to the relevant sections of the bill. It is important to maintain alignment with England and Wales in relation to the sentencing of individuals convicted of national security offences. Such offences are addressed on a UK-wide basis, making consistency in how offenders are treated essential, both in terms of sentencing and release arrangements. So consenting to these arrangements will ensure that Scotland is aligned with the rest of the UK on the sentencing and release individuals who have been convicted of the new state threat offences set out in the bill, and to the introduction of these new powers, which aim to disrupt and deter activities of state-linked entities. That will strengthen the Scottish Government's response to state threats, ultimately help to keep the people of Scotland safe. So, Presiding Officer, in light of these points, I would urge the Parliament to support this legislative consent motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Now call on Polly McNeill. 4 minutes, please.
As we've heard from the Cabinet Secretary, the UK Government's National Security State Threats Bill introduces new offences for supporting or assisting organisations linked to foreign powers, and as noted, it has been introduced to close loopholes, but it has been only introduced this month. For reasons which I think are clear. For example, MI5 have reported a 35% increase in state threat activity. So that's cyber operations, espionage, political interference, which members of this Parliament, I'm sure, are interested in. So whilst it's not a matter for this Parliament, the whole wider question, I think, is of interest to everyone. So I agree with the Cabinet Secretary that there's an argument for consistency across the UK, as national security is reserved. We want to align any systems to make sure that the same level of public protection, regardless of where someone is convicted. So the Scottish Government and the Parliament were given very limited time, so I understand why standing orders have to be suspended. Scottish Labour supports strong action in national security, but as we've always said, we always want to ensure that we protect the integrity of the Scotland Act, and if there's any implications for the devolved powers of this Parliament in relation to, say, for example, early release of prisoners and so on, then there is clearly a very minor, but albeit some aspect of devolved powers. With that, Presiding Officer, Scottish Labour are content to support the Scottish Government this evening on this legislative consent motion.
Colin Amanda Bland, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The central purpose of any government is to protect its citizens, and in an increasingly interconnected and digital world, threats to our national security no longer come solely from conventional military conflict. Foreign states, as you say, can interfere in elections, steal sensitive information, target critical infrastructure and exert influence through covert means. And this bill is designed to address exactly those modern challenges. And the bill updates our laws to meet contemporary threats. And by doing so, it helps safeguard the integrity of our democratic society. We support strong national security measures whilst continuing to hold governments accountable for how those powers are used. And whilst safeguards and oversight remains essential, the need for effective protection is clear, and hence we agree to support you with this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Maggie Chapman, who will be joining us remotely.
The need to protect Scotland and the UK from hostile states that threaten our security. But while the bill is framed in terms of state threats, it is ultimately individuals who will be investigated, prosecuted and convicted under the new offences it creates. That means we need to tread carefully in our scrutiny of the legislation. When we are changing the law, particularly criminal law, Parliament needs time to consider carefully the justification for those changes and to assess both their intended and unintended consequences. When those changes come from Westminster and legislative consent is required, we need time to consider all the issues properly. This has not been what's happened here. The UK Government did not share the final text of the bill before it was introduced on the 9th of June, despite having a report recommending these actions over a year ago. This Parliament goes into summer recess tomorrow. In practice, that's left us with just 8 days to scrutinise proposals that will alter Scottish law and the functions of Scottish ministers. The justification for such a rushed process is not convincing. The UK Government has argued that the legislation is entirely devolved, yet it should have been obvious, as it was obvious to Scottish Government lawyers, that the bill has consequences for Scottish sentencing, parole and release arrangements, and therefore required a full and timely legislative consent process. As the memorandum notes, there's been no opportunity for the Scottish Government to consult stakeholders on the effects of these changes to Scottish legislation. That's not how good law is made, and that's one key reason that we cannot support this motion this evening. But there are wider concerns about the substance of the bill that deserve more scrutiny than Parliament has been able to give them. The designation regime and the new offences relating to support, assistance and material benefit are very broad. Humanitarian organisations, peace-building groups, journalists and others working in conflict-affected areas will want reassurance that legitimate humanitarian engagement cannot inadvertently expose individuals to criminal liability. The Government may believe that adequate safeguards exist, but Parliament has not had sufficient opportunity to test those claims, hear evidence or examine possible unintended consequences. The lack of scrutiny matters because national security legislation is often enacted in response to genuine threats, but its effect can extend well beyond the circumstances that prompt it. The Scottish Greens recognise the case for ensuring consistency in sentencing and release arrangements across the UK where these offences apply. We also recognise the importance of protecting our national security. However, we cannot ignore the inadequate process that has brought us to this point, nor the missed opportunity for proper consultation and scrutiny. For these reasons, while we will not oppose the motion, we are not persuaded that the process followed merits our support, and we will abstain. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Stephen Kerr. 3 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, the first duty of any government is the security of its people, and that duty has become more challenging in a world where hostile states increasingly operate through proxies, front organisations and state-backed networks designed to undermine democratic societies and advance the interests of foreign powers. The purpose of this bill is straightforward. It gives authorities stronger powers to act against organisations involved in foreign state threat activity and create offences for those who support, assist or benefit from them. The Conservative Party supported the legislation at Westminster. Indeed, Conservative colleagues argued that some of its provisions should have gone further. But the principle is absolutely right. Those who act on behalf of hostile foreign powers should face serious consequences. So the issue before us today is a narrower one. The Legislative Consent Memorandum ensures that those convicted of those offences in Scotland will be subject to the same sentencing and release arrangements that apply elsewhere in the United Kingdom. I welcome that. Scotland should not have a less robust release regime for those involved in activities that threaten our national security, nor should there be different standards of treatment depending on where within the United Kingdom an offender happens to be prosecuted. It's important that there are no gaps or inconsistencies in how offenders convicted of these offences are managed right across the country. And at a time when hostile states are becoming more aggressive, more sophisticated, consistency matters. Deterrence matters. The ability of the United Kingdom to act decisively in defence of its own national interests matters. National security is one of the clearest examples of the strength of the Union. The threats we face are shared. The intelligence services that protect us are shared. The armed forces that defend us are shared. The response to hostile foreign powers must also be shared. For those who seek to undermine our security, do not distinguish. Happy to give way to David Barrett. Time.
Remembered my name, or had to look it up. I just wondered, do you reflect on why it took the French government to identify that the SNP was a target of threats from abroad in terms of hacking and attacks on our social media channels?
Stephen Kerr.
Well, I deprecate any foreign state involvement undermining our democratic processes, regardless of which party, and I think all of our parties, to some degree or another, have been subject to misinformation and downright lies. But let's be clear, those who seek to undermine our security do not distinguish between any of us and our party colours. They do not distinguish between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. They target the United Kingdom and all of us. And our response must therefore be united, robust and unwavering. And for those reasons, I support the motion.
Thank you. I now call on Yi-pei Chou Turvey to speak. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, President Officers. And as the Justice spokesperson, myself and the Scottish Liberal Democrats, we are showing full support for this bill. We have been calling on and on for the IRGC to be proscribed since 2024, and we are disappointed for the constant delaying of the government to do so. The previous Conservative government failed to proscribe this group, even if they suggested they would in 2023. The independent reviewer of terrorism and state threat legislation, Jonathan Casey, recommended more than 1 year ago that those terrorist-style powers to deter state threat actors such as IRGC, we need to take this measure urgently, but also to do so in due process with a strong scrutiny. The country is constantly targeted by state-backed influencers and actors, and it's crucial and vital that we have strong legislation to stop them. Even more, the IRGC has been at the core of brutal domestic repression, a threat to UK security, and by blocking them, we will assure the safety of all Iranian and Jewish communities across the country as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Neil Gray to wind up the debate. 5 minutes, please.
Nothing further to add, Presiding Officer. I think the issues have been well aired, and I'm grateful for the indication of multi-party support for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on motion on legislative consent, national security, state threats bill, UK legislation. It's now time to move to the next item of business, which is consideration of revised business motion 480 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, revising this week's business programme. I'll call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion. Any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press the request to speak button now.
Move, Presiding Officer.
No member has asked to speak to the motion. The question is that motion 480 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are all agreed. The next item of business is consideration of business motion 462 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme. I'll call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
No member has asked to speak to the motion. The question is that motion 462 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are all agreed. The next item of business is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau motion number 463 on designation of a lead committee. I ask Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
The question on this motion will be put at decision time. Now, before we move to decision time, I am minded to accept a motion without notice under Rule 11.2.4 of Standing Orders that decision time be brought forward to now. Minister?
Move, Presiding Officer.
The question is that decision time be brought forward to now. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are all agreed. There are 7 questions to be put as a result of today's business. I remind members that if the amendment in the name of Tom Arthur is agreed to, the amendments in the name of Daniel Johnson, Murdo Fraser and Willie Rennie will fall. The first question is Amendment 446.2 in the name of Tom Arthur, which seeks to amend motion 462 in the name of Malcolm Offord on Scotland Needs Reform, 5 years to 2031, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we move to a vote. There will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system. Okay, folks, we'll now restart proceedings. There's still one or two people who've got issues, but we need to move on. The question is that Amendment 446.2 in the name of Tom Arthur be agreed. Members, please cast your votes now. Voting is closed. Colleagues, the result of the vote on Amendment 446.2 in the name of Tom Arthur is yes, 75, no, 25. There are 17 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. The next question is that motion 446 in the name of Malcolm Offord, as amended, on Scotland Needs Reform 5 years to 2031 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are not agreed. Please vote now. Voting is closed. Point of order, Kate Nevins.
Apologies, my technology didn't work. I would have voted yes.
Thank you. Your vote is recorded. Clare Baker, point of order.
Apologies, I had a difficulty connecting. I would have voted yes.
Thank you. Your vote is recorded. Folks, the result of the vote on motion 446 in the name of Malcolm Offord as amended is yes 91, no 27. The motion is therefore, as amended, is therefore agreed. The next question is that motion 461 in the name of Neil Gray on national security states threats bill UK legislation be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. Please cast your votes now. Voting is closed. Point of order, Joe Fagan.
My device did not connect. I would have voted yes.
Thank you. Your vote is recorded. The result of the vote on motion 461 in the name of Neil Gray is yes 102, no 1. There were 15 abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed. The final question is that motion 463 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on designation of a lead committee be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is agreed. Just before I conclude decision time, I just want to wish all the best to Scotland in their match against Brazil tonight. We now move on to members' business. I ask members who are leaving the chamber to please do so quietly.